Well, we first thought that it might be a reality that D'Amico Ryans would part ways with Bobby Slowik when D'Amico gave a very, very short answer to how he felt Bobby Slowik improved throughout the season. And I didn't want to read too much into that at the time, but that was going to be one of the big questions with D'Amico as a head coach, as he has to, at times, perhaps part ways with people that he is very close friends with, if it's not what's right for the team, for that person to remain. He did it. At least in his eyes, he saw fit that they got to move on from Bobby Slowik. And I think for very understandable reasons. I think a lot of the discussion about Bobby Slowik has been more, all right, well, has he shown enough to show that he can get more out of this offense or that he can get better? And is how much of a futures bet do you want to make with an offensive coordinator, especially when there are other guys out there potentially that maybe the Texans have already been in conversations with. Everything shifts very quickly this time of year. I was starting to get a little bit nervous just because if the Texans Jerry Jones this and waited forever to make a decision, you see around the league, head coaches are getting hired. Those head coaches are hiring offensive coordinators. Certain offensive coordinators are getting job offers elsewhere as head coaches. So you gotta get out there and start feeling around for things. I think on the very sum total of my Bobby Slowik experience is that I think he is a smart guy, and I think he's still a very young coach. But there's times where you can be the smartest person in the world. It's a matter of implementing what you want to do and getting it executed. And we would hear week after week how, hey, we got to have better execution. We got to have better execution. It doesn't matter what the play calls are if the execution isn't there. Ultimately, the offensive coordinator is responsible for getting these guys to execute. And there were a couple things CJ said in his press conference that I don't think he meant at all as a shot at Bobby Slowik, but that I looked at as an indication that, man, they just did not, A, have a good plan for this season, and B, most critically, they didn't make adjustments. And I'm not talking about in-game adjustments even, but just make adjustments to what defenses were doing to them. And when they saw a whole bunch of cover two early in the season, it felt like the Texans took several weeks to even recognize that this was going to be an issue. When you've got really good wide receivers, yeah, they're going to play a whole bunch of cover two. The Texans didn't really do anything to exploit cover two. Instead of being on their heels and reacting to like, oh, how are we going to do this? You should get excited when you see a bunch of cover two because it creates other opportunities in the short passing game, in the run game, and the Texans just were not able to capitalize on any of this. So there will be some questions. I think first, and I saw that Sean T. Pendergast and I, who spend a lot of time with each other, both had the same initial reaction, is what I led off with, which is, all right, this is hard for D'Amico to do. This is the classic moment where you realize, all right, I might believe in Bobby Slowik, and I think D'Amico Ryans might believe in Bobby Slowik, but we've got a team to worry about, and we've got a young quarterback to worry about. And we've got a young quarterback who, over the course of several games this season, he was a different quarterback in the first quarter than he was in the fourth quarter, because by the fourth quarter, he just couldn't trust the pass protection. Yes, there's individuals that were not pass protecting well, but there was also a lot of confusion and discombobulation about assignments, what they're doing in both the run and the pass game. I mean, and my old rule has always been, if guys who I know aren't idiots are playing like they don't know the game of football, that tends to be a coaching issue. And there were times, especially in the first half of the season, when there were just so many blown assignments in pass protection and blitz pickup and everything else, where I see smart people doing stupid things on the field. That's either an issue with the offensive coordinator, the offensive line coach, or both, and the communication between those two. So there needed to be change. And I just don't think you can wait around hoping for Bobby Slowik to develop when in the third year of a quarterback's development, that's where you want to see him start to take that next step, to reach that next level, that 300 level stuff. And I think it would have been foolish to just hope or expect that Bobby Slowik was going to get that done. I don't think it's necessarily the end of the road for Bobby Slowik. Sean Payton famously once lost his play calling duties when he was at Dallas, correct? He rebounded and recovered, and he's done all right for himself. And we'll see. I think for Bobby, it's a matter of transferring the whiteboard to the playing field. And again, you can be super intelligent, but it's like an economics professor. He could be brilliant when it comes to economics. That doesn't mean that you want your economics professor to be the CEO of your company, because it's a whole different dynamic and skill set. It's not just knowing what to do. The old Bum Phillips quote was, it's not how much you know, it's what you can get your guys to do. And they were not getting guys to execute in a lot of ways. And we saw CJ at various times this season really start to show the detrimental effects of all of that. So I'm cautiously optimistic. Now the next stage is, all right, you fired your offensive coordinator. What do we do now? I like Gerard Johnson a lot. I think he's probably got a really good future as an offensive coordinator. I don't have an appetite right now for a rookie offensive coordinator with my third-year quarterback. And, I mean, Gerard's been here every step of the way. I was just my gut tells me get a veteran offensive coordinator. And I'll use Chip Kelly just as an example because he's the biggest name and it's the easiest to latch onto. But there's so many correlations to when Gary Kubiak finally let go of his ineffective defensive coordinators that he'd used in his first few years, and he just went and got Wade Phillips, I think with some nudging from the McNairs, however all that played out. But Wade Phillips could, for lack of a better term, be the head coach of the defense. And you've got an offensive-minded head coach who's learning how to become a head coach with Gary Kubiak in his first few years. I think it helped him a lot to be able to have somebody that could just take care of business on that side of the ball. So whether it's Chip Kelly, I mean, Bill Lazor is going to be talked about because he's been in the building for the last couple of years. He's been an offensive coordinator before with both the Bengals and the Dolphins. So guys like that, I'm just going to feel naturally more comfortable about. And we'll see. We'll see what the scuttlebutt is. The interviews for offensive coordinator do not tend to be nearly as public as the interviews or the discussions about head coach. So do the Texans have a plan right now already? Or are they going to be canvassing and looking to see what they have? I don't know, but I do think that to stick with Chip Kelly, for instance. Chip Kelly can be an asset not just as an offensive coordinator, but as an older coach, whether it's Chip Kelly or anybody else. The thing I've always been most impressed with by Chip Kelly's stay in Philadelphia was that he hired Jeff Stoutland, the offensive line coach who remains in Philadelphia and has been one of the best offensive line coaches this generation. And he did that without having any prior relationship with Jeff Stoutland. He asked around, he talked to people, he identified Jeff Stoutland, who was at Alabama at the time, and he brought him in, and they did great things together. And Jeff Stoutland continues to do great things together. You need your offensive coordinator who comes in to be very, very involved and hopefully have a long list of guys that he would like to have as an offensive line coach, because those will be the two big positions that we're watching this year. I just recorded a stream with Drew Hodgson, my former Texans teammate, who's a high school coach now, but a very, very smart former offensive lineman. And we were talking about Chip Kelly and some of the advantages and disadvantages. I think more than anything, Chip Kelly or whomever else gets the offensive coordinator job has demonstrated a real ability to scheme a run game. And, Chip Kelly, I think sometimes people think, oh, yeah, spread offense, up-tempo, it must be an air attack. No, that was a run-based offense. They spread to run, and that opened up things in the pass game. The other element, too, and I don't know how much this would have factored into decision-making, but you look at Washington last week. You're watching Jaden Daniels. Jaden Daniels is getting blitzed. Jaden Daniels is getting rid of the football to a wide-open hot route. And we did not see that. CJ's a second-year quarterback who's much smarter mentally and more advanced mentally than a lot of second-year quarterbacks. But it gets the level of difficulty in the way that Bobby was doing things was really hard for him to get rid of the ball quickly and viciously, to turn a weakness into a strength. And, you want to blitz us? We got somebody. We got an answer for you right now. He just didn't have those options as often. And then you add on to that the pass protection itself just couldn't be depended upon. So we saw that, we're going over all those 8 sacks in the game last week. And in my mind initially, it was, they were blitzing like crazy at the end. it was on four-man pass rushes. A couple of those sacks in the fourth quarter were on four-man pass rushes. But the offensive line was so freaked out by that point by all the previous blitzes, and CJ was so freaked out by the inability to pass protect versus a 4, 5, or 6-man rush that his process got changed a little bit. And it cannot be that way. You cannot take your young quarterback and subject him to another year of that. So my personal preference is for a veteran offensive coordinator, a guy that's got experience running an offense. Maybe he's been a head coach before. The dream is always to get a guy that's proven as an offensive coordinator, but has failed as a head coach, like a Josh McDaniels type per se, which leads us to this. All right, I bring up Josh McDaniels, Chip Kelly, whomever else. It's going to be a different scheme. It's going to be a different system. That doesn't have to be a bad thing. That, yes, it's awesome to have continuity. It's awesome to have the same verbiage, but it's kind of like learning. If I learn some primitive language and get really good at that primitive language, I can write on a cave wall real good like. But ideally, it would be better for me to take the time and to learn proper English. It's which I'm still struggling with. It doesn't matter. Okay, learn a different language, get really, really good in that language, get good in that scheme. If you've got a veteran coordinator who's been through this before, it doesn't have to be a bad thing. We saw Bruce Arians go to multiple different situations and get the best out of very good young quarterbacks, even though it was a new system or a new scheme for them. So I'm not worried about that part of it at all right now. I just want to get the most qualified guy. The other question would be, all right, what can be fixed with a new offensive coordinator? Because yes, they do have personnel issues. I don't think there's anybody out there that's going to turn Dalton Schultz into a good pass protector or a good run blocker. So whoever's working with Cade Stover, whoever's working with Irv Smith or anybody else, maybe Brevin Jordan, whatever his status is. Brevin Jordan will be coming back. Those are the guys you're going to have to lean into to hopefully get a little bit more of those guys, get more out of those guys as blockers. And then Dalton Schultz can be used for what Dalton Schultz does best, or whatever the options are in that scheme. So the tight end, I think there's potential there. I think Dalton Schultz is what he is, but it's a matter of, okay, what can you get out of multiple guys? Offensive line, I'm in a phase right now where I'm very much reevaluating how I feel about Laramie Tunsil, in that a lot of the things that I used to get frustrated with about him, I think he's made a concerted effort to change himself as a football player. When he was on a breakneck pace to set a record for false starts, he hit rock bottom, I think, and he realized, all right, this isn't acceptable. The best pass protectors in the league, the guys that are all pros, the Penei Sewells, the Trent Williams, guys like that, they tend to have 2, 3, maybe sometimes 4 false starts in a year. Trying to time the snap count, it's not an excuse. Laramie fixed it. He had the little blip there in the Titans game, and I'll make the excuse that it was a new snap or a new cadence with Davis Mills back there. Laramie made a lot of efforts there, but more importantly, I think he did genuinely commit himself to being a better run blocker, and that's not something that happens immediately. But his attention to detail in that aspect of the game improved. So I'm feeling cautiously optimistic about Laramie Tunsil with a new O-line coach, with a new offensive coordinator. Titus Howard at left guard. This was the first time that it seemed like he really jumped in and was committed to trying to do the right thing at left guard instead of reluctantly doing it. And I think that he's steadily loosened up a little bit and stopped saying that, nope, I'm a tackle no matter what. If he gets the right O-line coach and he's genuinely committed to it, I think they can do some good things with him at left guard. We saw some good things when they were running gap scheme stuff. When they were combo blocking, when they were just trying to be physical in the run game versus the Chiefs, they actually did some good things. He's just got to clean up a lot of the other stuff where he still plays like a tackle that got moved down to guard. Juice Scruggs and Jarrett Patterson, depending on what the next coach asks them to do, I saw some really good things out of Jarrett Patterson in that last game. I think he's improved in spots and spells, and I think there's potential there. Juice Scruggs, I need to see him in a new environment. Right guard, they need somebody new. The Trey Smith, the right guard from the Chiefs, he happens to be a free agent this year. I think Shaq Mason's it's time. He's not going to be one of these guys that plays effectively until he's 36 years old. I think age and injuries have just gotten to him. And then I'm optimistic about Blake Fisher. He played young, but he showed promise, and he's just got to take that next step. So with a new scheme and everybody else, I think there might be some potential there. I feel good about Joe Mixon. I feel good about Nico Collins. They got to get another wide receiver in. Depending on what happens with Steph, maybe that's Stephon Diggs. Maybe it's a second-round pick or a number 25 overall pick. You can get that depth back at wide receiver. Tank Dell, I'm looking at Tank Dell right now. I'm looking at him for 2026. And if he can play in 2025, so be it. You can't depend on him right now. Yeah, I saw somebody say new kicker. Yeah, but sticking to offense right now. We're sticking to offense. The options at offensive coordinator, I'm curious about some of your guys' opinions about that, because I'll end up doing a separate something about that this weekend. Mike Gesicki. Yeah, like the tight ends that are out there that they can bring in. What's your appetite for extreme free agency spending? Because whatever it is, it's not going to be as aggressive this year. I would be surprised if it's as aggressive this year. They were very aggressive eventually. Remember, for about 36 hours, everybody was livid with Nick Caserio because he wasn't doing anything in free agency, and then they ended up having one of the most aggressive free agencies out there. I think that he'll be aggressive. Like, Nick makes moves. He just does. For better or for worse, he's one of the most active GMs in the league. So whether it's via trade or free agency acquisition, I think tight end, wide receiver, an offensive guard, yes, I think those are areas that might be addressed in free agency. Maybe it's Stephon Diggs, maybe it's somebody else. But I would expect them to make a move. I think for the team as a whole, look, they've got Danico Autry making good money. They've got Danielle Hunter already making good money on the defensive side of the ball. There's room perhaps in the secondary, or probably not at linebacker. I think they like the youth at linebacker and Christian Harris. I'm hoping Christian Harris doesn't have this weird issue with his calf still next year. I think that you're pretty hemmed up over there, so you can spend more heavily on the offensive side of the ball. And really, if you think about the defensive side of the ball right now, I mean, in every position group, you've got Will Anderson. You feel very, very, very good about. He's still very, very young. I feel way better about Henry To'oTo'o right this moment than I did 365 days ago. I still feel good about Christian Harris, and he'll hopefully have a full training camp next year and all of that. Azeez Alshire comes back. But there's youth. Those first two guys, a lot of youth at linebacker still. And then you look in the secondary, my goodness. Derek Stingley, third-year player. You've got Kalen Bullock. You've got Kamari Lassiter, rookies. Jalen Petrie coming back, still a very young player. That, they'll whatever move they make, it's going to be along the lines of depth at cornerback, I think. Maybe you spend some money on a free agency, a guy that can play slot corner when they really need a guy that can play man and slot corner. But you don't have to spend heavily over on that side of the ball. I think it's going to be a very offensive, not an offensive offseason, but an offensive-oriented offseason. Should I be sad he's gone? No, you shouldn't be sad. I think you should be, I try to be respectful in these situations because it is true. I used to make the point that, listen, these coaches, they fire half their employees on the player side every single year. So they get fired, their contracts are guaranteed, don't worry about it. It's more than that because, coaches are at a stage in their life where their kids are in school and, it's just more disruptive to everything. And then every time a coach gets fired, it's a little mark against them for whatever reason, and they've got a longer career to think about. I really enjoyed listening to Bobby Slowik philosophize about football. I just needed him to be able to put those philosophies into action. And maybe that comes in his next stop. Maybe somewhere along the way it really clicks for him. It just wasn't going to be this year. And you can't wait on the development of your offensive coordinator when, as many of you have pointed out, and you hammered it into my head to be a little bit more nervous about it than I was initially. You go back to last year, you had a rookie center snapping the ball to a rookie quarterback with a rookie offensive coordinator calling the shots. And they did some good things. There was potential there. Now I say rookie like last year because it all changed up because of injuries, but Drew Scruggs and Jarrett Patterson most notably. Well, Jarrett Patterson most notably as a rookie. And then you go into this year expecting a guy who is going to, with Drew Scruggs, be a first-time, full-time starting center, still going to a young quarterback and a second-year offensive coordinator. So that's where my desire to have more experience in the offensive coordinator position comes in. I think there's a lot of younger guys like Gerard Johnson and otherwise that are really bright young minds. For this team right now, I want experience. I want guys that have been there, have done that, have responded multiple times in their career to seeing teams play a boatload of cover 2 versus them, and they have answers and they can pivot off of what they thought they were going to be. That, another thing that CJ said during his press conference, and again, I don't think he was throwing shade at Bobby Slowik one bit, but he talked about how, man, when he looks around the league at the good offenses, they tend to be really good at a few things, and they keep doing those few things over and over again. And during the season, you get to them in different ways. You do it out of different formations. You do it with different motion and different alignments, but you're running the same stuff, and you're really good at it. This year, it felt like a constant battle and struggle to just figure out what works. And then, I don't know, is it going to really work? Should we do it? No, we'll try this. I think in the pass protection at times, you'd get into the fourth quarter, and what happened versus the Chiefs was they'd seen so many different looks from the Chiefs, and they were almost overcorrecting and over-adjusting the protections at times to the point where the Chiefs just had them in a blender. Their brains had turned to liquid and run out their ears. And you can't have that. You got to have answers to that. You got to be able to give your guys some kind of substance to really lean into. And it never felt like the guys on offense had anything they could lean into. And I'm not excusing the players from that, but when you go and you watch the good offenses operate versus the way the Texans were operating, you don't even have to have a trained eye. When you watch the Lions offense operate, you can see the consistency, you can see the stability. If you know nothing at all about offensive line play, you just watch their body movement, watch how precise and methodical and well balanced they are all the time. And then you'd watch the Texans, and it's a little bit of just like, it looked like the old school electronic football, just guys kind of running into each other. It was not fun. Wasn't fun at all. Let's see. I feel good about Joe Mixon. If I didn't bring that up, I guess, D'Amico Ryans would be or not D'Amico Ryans, Dameon Pierce. Now I'm super intrigued and curious about Dameon Pierce because we saw in that Chiefs game, the runs that were working, a lot of the ones that worked really well were inside zone and duo and a lot of more just lunch pail football type of stuff. And they did well with it. And that's the kind of stuff that I think Dameon Pierce is best suited for. So we might end up seeing the best version of Dameon Pierce again, the way we did in the Titans game, depending on who comes in and how they choose to use those offensive linemen. I think Joe Mixon didn't show one bit of getting too old or anything. And my old rule for running backs is, I feel like if you've established yourself, you have to worry about running backs and their durability these days. But once a guy gets to a certain age and performs, I worry less about them. And that's how I felt about Derrick Henry. You guys will remember from the offseason, I wanted Derrick Henry more than Saquon Barkley. That probably ends up being a wash. I mean, obviously, by virtue of the Eagles still being in the playoffs, maybe Saquon Barkley would have been the better choice. I don't think either one of them would have done all that well this year. I think either one of those guys probably would have had maybe a slightly better year than Joe Mixon, but not the fireworks that they had because they don't have the same. They just aren't. They're running in better schemes. They're running in better coach schemes than the Texans were. So I feel fine about Joe Mixon. I'm intrigued by Dameon Pierce. Andrew Beck, when he was in the game as a fullback, they did some good things in that game. So whomever wants to come in, I feel good about the core they have on offense as long as some of those fringe guys can turn into genuine, just blue-collar guys that you can rely on, that you can depend on. I'll feel okay about that. And it's just, okay, what can you get out of your superstars? What can you get to complement Nico Collins? What can you get CJ for in terms of play calling, play design, and then personnel on the field? options early in the down, options when he blitzes. Stephon Diggs might still be that same guy, but he's 31 years old, coming off of an ACL. Whomever it might be, he needs options faster. It needs to be snappier. The quick game has to be humming. I want to see more Jaden Daniels and less of whatever the hell all that stuff was this year. I'm not comparing Jaden Daniels to C.J. Stroud. Jaden Daniels has options. When Jaden Daniels gets blitzed, he's hitting his guy immediately. He's got an option. He's not waiting on things to develop. And then Bobby leaning into play action, which philosophically I'm cool with. But man, you gotta be able to do it. It's one of the big drawbacks of a Kubiak-Shanahan style system. It's that it works really, really well, but you gotta coach the hell out of it and have the guys operating it really well. And if they don't, then it becomes a big drag on you. And I just kept waiting for it to show signs of being coached really well, because you got to make everything look the same. Everything that you ever heard about with Kubiak, when you're leaning into the play action, you want those defensive backs and linebackers to be genuinely bamboozled and screwed up in the head. You want them to be committing to the run or just have a little bit of hesitation in their minds as they're waiting to make the read. And you didn't get that with the Texans. You saw linebackers routinely just kind of hovering 7 yards back, just either waiting for the running back to cut back because he knew that it was going to come to him, or they could tell immediately that it wasn't going to be a run, and they would just sit back in coverage. And it makes it really hard to operate if you're not coaching it up well. And it's simply on the sum total of it all this year, it didn't feel like it was engineered all that well. Another guy. Yeah, somebody points up, Shanny's great between the 40s, not so much red zone. That comes back into the old also, and this is a constant battle with Kubiak-Shanahan schemes. It's that, man, if you want to major in outside zone tends not to be so hot in the red zone. So you got to also get good at all the old school power and duo and everything else where you're moving bodies, but you're spending so much time working on the outside zone that, yeah, you gotta coach it up really, really well. And this was the worst version of it. Shanahan, those offenses have been incredible, and Shanahan is a guy who wants to own you in the run game. Slowik is a guy that was a passing game coordinator. The Texans didn't have a run game coordinator, which I found interesting because Slowik was a pass game coordinator in San Francisco, and obviously it's Shanahan's offense. So this was his first real dose of genuine leadership, and that is a lot, especially with a rookie quarterback and everything else that goes with it. On the D'Amico side of things, and I try to be honest with this because I love D'Amico so much, so I try to be as objective as possible about it. The challenge for D'Amico is he's a defensive-minded head coach, but the more important words in that job title are head coach, obviously. And as smart as he is, how much can he influence the offensive side of the ball? And how can he get better at that part of it? If you were to bring Chip Kelly in, for instance, Chip Kelly, he's not as up-tempo as he used to be, but he's been in different scenarios. But when he was in the NFL, he was very up-tempo, and the defenses on his teams would tend to be in the top 3 in the NFL for number of snaps played every year. The defenses would just be out there forever. And you would start to see a lot of times the defenses just kind of falter towards the end of the year. And it was physiological as much as anything else. And I think that it would be interesting with D'Amico as his head coach and Chip Kelly being much the elder guy and a guy that used to, does he have any of that dad strength over D'Amico psychologically because he was his head coach once? It's something you got to consider because D'Amico's going to have to be sure, as a defensive-minded coach, I guarantee you, D'Amico's not going to want Chip to always be operating at turbo speed. It's going to have to be really in doses, which is still in the NFL, I think, the best way to do it. The Patriots used to be lethal with this. They would come out and they'd be lightning fast. And they learned a lot from Chip Kelly and how to do all that. And then they'd slow it down. And they'd go old school and they'd suck up clock. And then maybe sometime in the middle of a series, all of a sudden, they see a defensive package that they think they can take advantage of. Boom, 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 boom. lightning fast. There was very little that was lightning fast this year about the Texans. So that was one of the other areas that they took a step backwards in, was the actual process. So when it comes to, does this offense look like they know what they're doing? And without a trained eye, again, you could tell, wait a second, these guys just don't seem to operate the way a lot of other offenses do. Why are they getting up to the line of scrimmage late? Why is it taking them? Why is the play clock running down so low? Why do they look hurried to do this? Like, all these things, it seemed like it got gummed up more this year than it did last year, when you would have expected a lot of these glitches. And on the game management side of things, it really felt like they took a step back. And part of that is defenses. They don't just have film on C.J. Stroud. They've got film on Bobby Slowik. And they know what you want to do, how you're going to operate in certain situations. And defenses did a really good job all year long of showing the offense looks that they knew were going to make the offense think a little too hard, or they could predict which way the offense was going to adjust. And then defenses, especially coordinators like Steve Spagnuolo, they took advantage of it. And that is part of, at the risk of, I don't want to lean too heavily into, talking about second half adjustments by the offense, because it should be something that's more continuous. It's less common for, like, the big light bulb moment to come while you're working through something at halftime. There are things that you're adjusting to throughout the game. And defenses, especially good defensive coordinators, we saw time and time again, had better answers to what the Texans were doing offensively. As a player or as a coach in the league, a lot of times those first few series especially, but sometimes the entire first three quarters, you're just trying to really figure out, all right, how are they playing us today, and what do I need to call a little bit more of? What do I need to lean into? What have I set up already? How is that defensive end playing versus the options and whatnot, like, and the bootlegs? That's the stuff that I felt like Bobby Slowik didn't have a feel for. The other thing that was frustrating to me, and the one thing that I always use as a barometer for offensive coordinators, is how good is your screen game? Andy Reid, I think we can all agree, is a pretty good offensive coordinator. His screen game is immaculate. His screen game is precise. His screen game catches people by surprise all the time. And you see guys catch the ball out there and then have nothing but green grass to run. With the Texans, it was the exact opposite. It was, you could see until the one screen they ran in the Chiefs game where they actually did everything right. Usually with the Texans, you could see the defensive backs, the linebackers, they identified screen, boom, they were out there. And it was like, it was so poorly executed that I always look at that as, all right, where is your attention to detail? Because in the screens, you've got tells by formation, you've got tells by stances, you've got tells by body language, pre-snap, like all of these finer details, all these little clues that defensive players can pick up on, how the quarterback is operating with it. And good NFL defenses pick up on that, and they're in your playbook at that point. And it speaks to an inattention to detail across the board when you can't execute screens properly. And that, again, is something that Bobby Slowik was just abysmally awful at. And it was unfortunate, especially because you should have had opportunities. You should have had opportunities when teams were blitzing you. You should have had opportunities when people were playing shell coverage to carve them up over the middle, and they just didn't do it enough. Let's see. Bobby, 1 year in building, taking head coaches. I know, it's a rough league, man. It's a rough league. I think a lot of the interviews last year for Slowik were very much more on the, let's get to know this guy. Okay, boy, this guy had, and this is the way owners operate. The smart owners, they know that when they get a guy in their building for an interview, that coach is going to have very few filters on what he gives away about, how he operates. And so the owners get a real good feel for, all right, I'm going to keep this guy in mind for the future. Okay, this guy. And Bobby, from his press conferences, I think Bobby probably was very interesting to owners and GMs because he's got a good brain for football. Like, he understands a lot. He's a very smart and thoughtful guy. He just wasn't able to really come through and show that he could execute it. So I think a lot of those were more exploratory last year. Kind of the same way D'Amico did some interviews, and I think maybe teams weren't necessarily sure he was ready, but they wanted to get a look at him, kick the tires a little bit. That's what it was with Bobby Slowik last year. The big question coming into this season, and what we talked about all offseason was, and I would have to tell people from outside of Houston to pump their brakes. It was a weird offseason because the Texans went from being a team that why would D'Amico go there? They're just going to fire him after 1 year anyway. It was stupid. So they went from that to all of a sudden, boy, the Texans are going to be unstoppable. It's going to be ridiculous. They'll probably have 3 1,700-yard receivers. I would tell people when I would go on in markets outside of Houston, listen, they haven't established that they can actually run the football, which I know everybody's so enamored of the passing game these days that they think the run game's just an afterthought. It's not. If anything, and we saw it this year, the teams that don't know how to, the coordinators that don't know how to install and execute in the run game really got exposed, and they looked like Madden warriors, because when teams decide to play a boatload of cover 2 and just basically concede the run, you've got to run the football. I would get so frustrated. Look, as an old school, washed up old dude, I'll tell you this, as a defensive player, the hallmark for whether you're a genuinely good defense or not, as a defensive lineman especially, like, are you a good all-around defense, is can you stop the run in cover 2? Because it's really freaking hard to stop the run in cover 2. And then you look around this year, and all these people are like, oh, they're playing cover 2. What do we do? Oh, you run the ball, you little fancy lad. And that's where the Texans were. They couldn't take advantage of cover 2. It's so simple. It's so stupid. And yet there they were. So you can see why I want an older offensive coordinator. I want somebody who's been through the wars. I want offensive coordinators who understand that cover 6 isn't some recent invention. They've been running it for 30 years. But these damn bloggers, and then the bloggers, they infiltrate the minds of the offensive coordinators who are only obsessed with the passing game, and they don't get the whole deal. I don't need that. I don't need any little wonder kids. I don't need the chess genius that all of a sudden realizes he can't beat the grandmaster right off the bat the way he's beat up all the high school kids forever, and then he becomes a meth addict, okay? No meth addict chess proteges. That's the last thing I want. I want a guy of average intelligence but great work experience. It's like Warren Buffett says about great investors. You don't want, if anything, you don't want a genius. You want a guy that's got a 120, 140 IQ, anywhere in there, in that range, above average intelligence. That's all I need. And then after that, can you do the work? Some of you guys have hired people before. You guys who are in charge of hiring people, maybe especially if you're hiring engineers or something, you know damn well that the 4.0 GPA doesn't tell you crap about how somebody operates in a work environment. You want somebody that gets the work done. I need somebody who's established as somebody who can get the work done as an offensive coordinator. Just like Gary Kubiak, having Wade Phillips come in as an established guy who had been a head coach, has all kinds of leadership traits, and is a proven defensive coordinator. Likewise, I'd like somebody that's got a little bit of salt and pepper in their hair on the offensive side of the ball. Too humid for screens, yeah. Okay, yeah, I'll take notes after this live stream on the OC candidates. I'm going to tell you right now, toke with me. Not yet. I got work to do. Trying to get my taxes done. That I want to spend a little time with this. I don't want to just start throwing names out casually. I don't want to throw 20 names out and then when they hire one of them say like, yep, I told you, been talking about him since January 24th, I have. Put that bug in the ear at D'Amico Ryans back in 2006. I told him you got to keep an eye on this kid. Even series adjustments were difficult most games. If they had a pre-snap penalty, those drives were destined to be failures. You know, Russell, and that's the great irony of that 82-yard touchdown drive by the Texans. It was more impressive than it looks on paper, yet also more discouraging because of how many penalties they had. They had that bogus one on Dalton Schultz for offensive pass interference, but I think that was on that series, was it not? I think they had 3 penalties on that drive. They just kept knocking themselves back, then they would regain the yardage. We talk about game management, and I guess I'd put this one on D'Amico. On that 82-yard drive, the Xavier Hutchinson catch over the middle that they should have challenged. I mean, that was a first down. They didn't challenge it, and it's 3rd and 1. So you're like, all right, whatever. We'll either convert or kick the field goal with Kaimi. Is that why don't you go ahead and just risk that timeout and challenge that? But it's 3rd and 1, and then it gets knocked back to 3rd and 6 because of a penalty. So that was the Dalton Schultz penalty. So look, that stuff, they got sloppier this year. That was the really discouraging thing is on defense, I thought that they took on the attitude and the look of a DeMeco Ryans defense. And the penalties on defense, let's be honest. Every now and then, you bruise somebody's spleen illegally. It happens. Every now and then, somebody gets concussed. Whoa! I wasn't paying attention. I can live with aggressive penalties. It was the dumb penalties on offense. It was the procedure issues. It was timeouts taken to avoid delay of games or the actual delay of games when they were called. Those are the things that frustrated me. And then the entire operation that should get better, but you've got to have actual. Okay, so I'm going to seek this out. Alex said something good. Now I got to seek out. Alex, where are you? How are you responding to Alex's comment from apparently 45 minutes ago? Damn it. Alex, if you're still here, tell me what you said. Let's see. They better hurry on OCs if they're hiring outside the team because all these new coaches are grabbing the best ones. Yes, very good point, Metal Pigeon. And that was where I was starting to get nervous. And I told Drew Hodgson when we were recording this, we did a breakdown of all 8 sacks, which honestly, I felt better after watching all 8 sacks. I feel better on the personnel side of things too, because I think some of the issues were simply Shaq Mason. Some of the issues were the protection and how they adjusted their protections. So one you can fix. For one, the right guard for the Chiefs there, he's one of the best available free agents this offseason. Chiefs are having a harder time retaining their free agents these days. We'll see. So I think it's probably time for Shaq Mason to move on. I think the protection, both in the way it was coached and the actual protections called or how they were adjusted, that can be tweaked and made better. I think Blake Fisher's going to get better. And then depending on who the offensive coordinator comes in, I think that they can. And you know what I'm guilty of? I'm guilty of being a true believer in the Shanahan scheme and thinking all right, look, a lot of times it takes 2 years to really click with this thing. You just got to keep sticking with it. But it became very clear that obviously they either weren't good at coaching it or these aren't the right players for it. Whichever offensive coordinator comes in, it's got to be a guy who can adapt and adjust to the personnel he has. And it's, Shanahan's offense is way more diverse than I think it gets painted out to be sometimes, but they also have done a good job of getting the personnel that fits his scheme. You've got to have a guy that can look at the personnel and figure out exactly what the best strategy is and what to drill, work, hammer, and get good at it. And I'm leaning towards a veteran guy on that. When it comes to the timing of it, yes, 100%. I was getting nervous that we're here on Friday. All the coaches have been fired, and half the positions have now been filled for head coach or so. And those guys are talking to offensive coordinators right now. Now's the time where you have to be talking to people. There's 2 things on the DeMeco Ryans decision side of it. And this is a hard part of being a head coach when you got to fire one of your best friends in the world. And that's what he had to do. But he's got to do what's right for the team. In evaluating Bobby Slowik, you got to also maybe have conversations with old coaches of yours like Chip Kelly or whomever else. You got to kind of start feeling around for who's out there, who's interested. Would they be an upgrade for sure over Bobby Slowik? And what I would hope is that they've already made some inroads along those lines and that the offensive coordinator, defensive coordinator searches are much less transparent than the head coach interviews. So we don't know how far along they are in all of that. I mean, it could be when you fire your offensive coordinator, it's kind of like when you fire a college head coach, you better have some guys pretty close that you feel really good about are gettable. Because the downside would be, if you fire an offensive coordinator naked and you don't have a plan for what happens if you don't get the top 3 guys you want on the list, you could end up in a situation that's worse. So D'Amico obviously is going to be huge in that. I think on the guy that can work on this stuff all year long with no fear of selling out his coach or anything is Nick Caserio. So Nick Caserio and his conversations with whomever it might be. Did they make the Josh McDaniels thing official yet, by the way? Yeah, he's officially it. Okay. Look, Josh McDaniel has been known to pull out of a deal or two before it actually gets consummated. So, I don't know. Oh, wait a second. Am I getting things mixed up? No, I'm not getting mixed up at all, right? Yeah. I think that... Just let me double check. Yeah, okay, he's official. For those of you who don't know, Josh McDaniels accepted the job with the Colts, went back to gather his things in New England, and Bill Belichick said, and that was enough. He's a honey-tongued devil, he is, at Bill Belichick. Promised him the keys to the vault and all the ways there are to manage and coach a team, and a lot of good it did the Raiders. All right, what do I think about Bieniemy as OC? Not much these days. And no, I don't... Like, there's a reason that the drumbeat for Eric Bieniemy stopped being as loud and as heated as it was. But in he interviewed with the Texans, we'll see. I'm not super intrigued by Eric Bieniemy. They should have given Gerard a chance. Okay, this is where I am with this Texans Spur 80. I don't want a first-time offensive coordinator. I love Gerard Johnson. I think he's got a bright future. He doesn't need to be the guy on this team as a first-time offensive coordinator. You've got a defensive-minded head coach who really didn't show any ability to actually influence or improve the offense this year, unless D'Amico was the only guy that kept that being a complete flaming mess and the worst offense in the league. The offense needs help, and they need experience, and they need wisdom. And I don't have an appetite for a young offensive coordinator feeling his way through. I need a guy that's actually called plays, and it's not just calling the plays, it's the game planning throughout the week. It's adjusting to the way defenses are adjusting to you. It's dealing with interpersonal issues. It's figuring out the best way to motivate the 25 or so guys on your side of the ball. It's a lot, and it's a lot for a first-time offensive coordinator to handle. In hindsight, yeah, I really wish from the get-go that D'Amico had hired a former head coach or a longtime offensive coordinator or a Cliff Kingsbury. Many of you have every right in the world to say, I told you so, Seth, because I was skeptical of Cliff Kingsbury. Yes, it's just 1 year with Jaden Daniels, but Cliff has been an offensive coordinator and a head coach in the league. So, and I'm intrigued by Cliff Kingsbury as strictly, like this is the first time he's been an offensive coordinator alone in the NFL without also trying to be a head coach. I think Cliff Kingsbury might end up being one of those guys that, they realize eventually, like, okay, well, this guy's a really good offensive coordinator, but we don't like him as a head coach. I don't know he'll probably get one more opportunity as a head coach. So I keep him in the hopper as like, okay, somewhere down the line, if he gets a job and he fails as a head coach, then you've got your magical guy that is probably never going to get another head coaching opportunity again, like Josh McDaniels in New England. Norv Turner by a certain point is, well, Norv kept getting shots. Dick LeBeau would be a perfect example as a defensive coordinator that flamed out as a head coach, but then he ended up being one of the best defensive coordinators in the league for literally decades, coached until he was 80-something. That's the dream. That's the dream, my friend. We need a hard-ass OC to match D'Amico's intensity. I hope not in the Shanahan system. I'm not overly worried about this system at this point. I used to make arguments for, hey, get a guy from the Shanahan tree because then you can keep the terminology and everything the same. That's a little bit of that's overly ambitious. I think that that's a grand plan. It's one of those things where, you plan things out and it turns into a parlay. Like, I was watching a Jets YouTuber, the other day when Bobby Slowik interviewed, and he was going over the assets or the pluses for Bobby Slowik. And they said, well, hey, he's a young guy. He's only 37 or so. So if it works out, he could be the Jets coach for 3 decades because he's young. All right, man. Listen, I'll worry about whether my coach is too old or not when we get to the point where I want to worry about whether he's too old or not. Let's not plan the coronation when the baby's just been born and there have been assassination attempts on the king. All right, we got people trying to snipe us all over the place right here. I used to think about that when I was out on the football field, on the practice fields there at NRG, because there's that one hotel that's just on the north end of the stadium. I'm like, oh my God, that's a perfect spot for a sniper. And what I was actually thinking about was it's a perfect spot for somebody from an opposing team to just park themselves up there with a camera and film your entire practice. I don't know if we were ever good enough while I was there for anybody to bother with that. Jim Harbaugh would have done it, you know that, if the iPhone had been invented yet. I'm just happy my Toa prediction was right. Due to Harris being out, he started at linebacker, made a huge improvement. Good job, Toph with me. Okay, maybe I will Toke with you earlier. You're making some good points here. The Dallas offense was not bad. I don't know what that's in reference to. They are way better than what we have had. I don't know what that's in reference to. If you're making a comment in real time, I'm not. Try to maybe be a little bit more specific, because I'm not likely going to get to the comment when you got to define the pronouns and everything. I need to know who they is. It's going to be Chip Kelly. He would be my odds-on favorite at this point. I would love to hear your arguments against Chip Kelly. And I mean that honestly. I'm not saying that rhetorically. I would love to hear what the arguments against Chip Kelly are. I heard somebody the other day said, he's... I can't remember, they said antiquated or he's lost his fastball or what, which was an odd statement to me, because it was made 2 days after he won the national championship in a game in which they had 4 consecutive drives of 70-plus yards. And I was trying to figure out, all right, he couldn't get Cal to win a national championship? Like, all right, I don't know, man. I don't feel like we're in a position to say that Chip Kelly is antiquated or out of touch or not up to speed. I really didn't get that comment. Any OC candidates who might have okay, Mike Munchak. This is going to come up a lot. This is what I would say with Mike Munchak. He's 64 years old, if I remember properly. He wanted to retire once before. In his second to last job, I know when he was done with that, I think he wanted to retire, but then he got lured back into, I think he was in Denver last, and he's got family in Denver, I believe, and he's got, I'm guessing, grandkids and a bunch of them, and I think he's made a boatload of money in his career, because he was a Hall of Fame player, but that was before those guys got paid quite as big. But then he was an NFL coach for a long time. I'm not going to allow myself to be optimistic that Mike Munchak's going to get lured out of retirement. And then there's always the question of, hey, Chris Strausser is a guy that was contemplating retirement when they hired him, and he's not the level of offensive line coach that Munchak was. The play for Munchak, obviously, would be somehow touching on nostalgia. We might want to enlist Bruce Matthews in this, because Bruce coached for a few years, and I just don't think it was for him. Plus Bruce has like 6 kids himself, and I'm guessing a boatload of grandchildren by now. So I don't think that Bruce wants to coach, but he's very tight with Mike Munchak, obviously. And if Munchak could come sleep on Bruce Matthews' couch or one of his adult children's vacated bedrooms while he was here and maybe thinking about it, maybe have a little barbecue with Bruce, go ride some horses or something, maybe there's an avenue there. Munchak, though, let's set aside our hopes that somehow Munchak would be into it and be passionate about it, because that's a big if for a guy that's 64 years old and is already retired. Munchak was an incredibly good offensive line coach, and I say that because I used to play against his teams twice a year when he was an offensive line coach for the Titans, and they were a pain in the ass. You'd go up against guys that you're watching on film, and you're like, oh, this guy's no good. He's just they had to stick him in there because of injuries. And then you get in the game, and you realize, like, oh, crap. They're fooling me. This kid's fooling me with his footwork. This kid's making me think it's a run to the A-gap, and then he's wheeling on me. Like, all the little nuances of the game, all the little really fine detail stuff, Munchak was awesome at that. And I do think that offensive line coach is one of the most important underrated position of all the underrated position coaches. I think that offensive line coach is it. And it's turned into this way. In college now, offensive line coaches are a lot of times the second highest paid guy on the coaching staff because they realize how important they are. But or the strength and conditioning coaches are pretty big in college too. I think that it's a big hire, and that's one more reason, honestly, where I don't want a young offensive coordinator. I want an offensive coordinator who's had experience hiring offensive line coaches, working with offensive line coaches, who accepts the input from offensive line coaches, because you got some offensive coordinators out there that ask their O-line coaches and their O-lines to do some things that just aren't realistic. So somebody that's got relationships with lots of guys around the league and can hire an offensive line coach that he knows is going to be good with him and in his system. Maybe they've worked together already before. Having that consistency and that cohesion between your offensive line coach and your offensive coordinator is big. And, it's like Chris Strausser, it wasn't that he had never coached outside zone or anything like that before, but he came from a different world than Bobby Slowik came from. There's just different lineages and maybe the ways they operate. There's a lot of maybe philosophical or techniques type things that I think they probably just weren't on the same page. And you're spending this time with, mind you, a rookie quarterback, a rookie center these last 2 years for broad stretches of time. And it's a recipe for, I don't want to say disaster, because there have been some really good things in the first year at least, but it's a recipe for Murphy's Law to go into effect. You add that many unknowns and elements to where guys are going to have to learn about each other and how they operate. It's just not a recipe for a finely tuned machine. And it's also a hard part to, it's a hard thing for Bobby Slowik. It's a hard thing as a young offensive coordinator. I think for Bobby Slowik, and I know that most of you aren't overly concerned for Bobby Slowik's future right now. I'm saying this now, so 7 years from now, you don't all of a sudden say, oh, look at Bobby Slowik just won a Super Bowl as the offensive coordinator with the Browns. The Browns. I think he's really smart, but he's also very young by coaching standards. And he was probably thrust. This was one of those things where for D'Amico, who's good friends with Bobby, this is the kind of thing you might tell yourself to rationalize having to fire your friend, but I think it's actually also probably genuinely true. I think Bobby Slowik wasn't ready for it yet. And B, if Bobby Slowik were to go into this season and it looked like it did in 2024, that might be it for Bobby Slowik. You can survive a dalliance early in your career, like Sean Payton, who got his play calling duties taken away from him when he was a young coach. You can survive a little blip or a blemish early in the career, but if you become the guy that's pointed to as all that's wrong and everything that destroyed C.J. Stroud or anything like that, it gets a lot tougher later on. So I think D'Amico could reasonably tell himself that, this is probably best for everybody. I know we haven't talked about Greg Grissom parting ways with the Texans either. That's more on the business side of things, but I think it's related in some ways because these are major changes within the organization. I don't get the sense that Greg Grissom was, fired or whatever. Like they phrased it as parting ways. I don't know I think they probably had conversations where maybe there were philosophical differences or what have you. I think things were going pretty well on the business side of things, but sometimes just people have different ideas about the way they want to operate, et cetera, et cetera. And largely, if you're watching this right now and you're personally affected by Greg Grissom's departure, it's probably because you're a corporate suite holder, you're a sponsor of the team, you're a CEO of a company in Houston, or you work in the Texans organization. It does for the health of the organization, everything, it matters a lot, the team president. It just doesn't necessarily affect the fans on a day-by-day basis the same way everything else is. But I like Greg a lot. I thought he did a great job taking over for Jamie Roots after Jamie Roots left. And he also, Greg had to navigate his way through the waning stages of the Jack Easterby era and be part of moving forward. So I'm grateful to anybody in the Texans organization that made it through that fire and I think helped improve the organization for the better in a lot of ways. So, and Greg was a big fan of my Twitter back when I used to be way just way more obnoxious on Twitter. Funnier too. But I can't handle I can't handle the toxicity, and I can't handle being the toxic one. That's the issue I've always had with X. Before Musk, after Musk, it's got nothing to do with Musk. It's that I feel like it rewards the worst version of yourself. It rewards you at your snarkiest, at your most petty. It rewards you when you are just have what's the word I'm looking for? When you just eviscerate people, then yes, it rewards you. And I don't need any help in that regard. Let's see. D'Amico loves him. CJ speaks highly of him. Ryan Day had him. Familiarity with our squad is there. Talking about Chip Kelly, yes. As far as LT, left tackle, we talked about this a little bit earlier, Troy. I'll probably do a piece on Laremy Tunsil here at some point in the next few weeks because I'm very open to reevaluating Laremy Tunsil. I think Laremy hit rock bottom when he was on pace to not just break but obliterate the record for false starts in a season. I think he maybe through a come to Jesus meeting with Bobby or D'Amico or whomever else, he looked more committed to not just false starting but also to being a good run blocker, like more engaged in the run game, more of a complete left tackle instead of just a pass protection specialist. And I want to give him credit for that. And it's not like all of a sudden he was going to turn into Trent Williams or Penei Sewell as a run blocker midway through the season. But I did see a commitment there that I liked. And he is, at the end of the day, he's an incredible pass protector. If he can become the completely well-rounded guy that does buy in, I'm all on board on changing some of my skepticism or my hesitancy about Laremy Tunsil. So that's where I am with him. It's a new day, new offensive coordinator, new offensive line coach. Okay, this is an interesting, Michael. Let's talk about finding an OC that will give Stroud more control at the line. And this is another genuine question. I'm not asking rhetorically. How many second-year quarterbacks come up to the line of scrimmage with complete and total, audible command, or the ability to have the entire playbook as an audible? This is something that with young quarterbacks, you got to bring it along slowly because it's like going from driving an automatic to having to double clutch a semi. It's a big leap in all of the things you have to operate and manage. And CJ did have the ability to check protections and check run to pass, etc. He could check in and out of plays. It's to get to the point where you have complete command of everything. That's on a different level, and I don't think there's a lot of offensive coordinators out there that would have had CJ up there trying to operate like he's Tom Brady right now. That's something that comes with time. So that'll come with time. And I think in Bobby's mind, it would have come eventually with that. I mean, one of the big problems with this year was the actual plan and strategy for pass protection. And also in the run game, this doesn't affect CJ directly, but in the run game, the rules that they were operating by and some of the rules that they were operating by in their pass protection, they were too hard to execute. And I don't think it would have mattered who it was as quarterback if he's having to execute the game plan. I just don't think the Texans were ready for it this year. So I'm not as worried about that. CJ will get more and more responsibility for that as he moves along. There's always breaking news after you and Sean get off the air. This time it wasn't as bad because it happened 4 hours after we were off the air, whereas usually it happens at like 10:01 a.m. This time I can live with this. Who can teach CJ to slide properly? I'm going to tell you something. In 2002, when David Carr was having a hard time sliding, maybe it was 2003 or 2004, I can't remember which Astros player was out there, but they kind of jokingly had the baseball player show CJ how to slide, David Carr how to slide, and it got picked up. And I remember it wasn't in the infancy of people talking about sports on the internet. By then, it was on the chat rooms and everything. People were besides themselves with rage, like that because they thought it was like a serious thing the Texans were doing. I think that's a CJ thing where looking at that game. By the time they got to the fourth quarter, CJ like he has in a few games this year, he looked rattled. And going back and watching some of those sacks, there were times where he did have a clean pocket where he bailed a little too early. And I think where earlier in games or in other games this year, he showed a willingness to stick in there. But you look at how he operated in the pocket this year compared to last year as a rookie, there were times where he just was operating more erratically. And then when you add on to it, okay, him making the decision for when to run, that's going to come with time. And I think he's started to make that progress there during the playoffs, really. But it's just not quite there yet. And it's really hard to develop when the pass protection is really bad. I don't think he's not the guy right now who is the cause of getting sacked to the degree where guys like Caleb Williams, Joe Burrow early in his career, some of those guys were just way too eager to hold onto the ball for way too long. And they would have high sack numbers, but it wasn't specifically only because of the offensive line. I still put it way more on the offensive line side of things than CJ himself at this point, but you could see it took its toll. That in that playoff game, the fourth quarter, it had taken its toll. The Green Bay game this year was one where it was a really good example of, by the end of the game on that final drive, when CJ threw the ball, when he had a clean pocket and he threw to Tank on the sideline, which stopped the clock and didn't do anything to help them in terms of getting a new set of downs or anything else. If he had hung around in the pocket, John Mechie would have probably been open for a touchdown because John Mechie was coming clean. He would have been the third read. He would have had to go from the right field to the center of the field. He makes that read all the time, and he's done it before. But by the fourth quarter of that game, and that was a game in which, remember, there were glaring missed assignments. You had moments where both the offensive tackle and the running back were trying to block an interior defender while the defensive end, the edge rusher, ran completely free. It happened on the left side once. It happened on the right side once. They couldn't pick up the blitz. They had just glaring issues on the offensive line. So you can see why by the fourth quarter, CJ had no reason to anticipate or expect that he would have time to make it through his full progression. And I'm not at the point where I'm worried that he's permanently damaged or anything, because he still shows all the evidence that he knows what to do, and he's demonstrated that he's capable of working his way through all those progressions, understanding what the defense is doing and how the offense is going to adjust to it. All of that, he's very good at that. He just did not have a stable platform to really execute from this year. So I'm cautiously optimistic they'll get a guy that can handle that better. CJ had happy feet this season, not as many quick or hot throws that led to sacks. Hard to blame just one person. Yeah, the guy I've brought up before is watch Jaden Daniels this weekend, because you watched Jaden Daniels last weekend. Man, when they blitzed him, seafood buffet. He had options. He had choices, and they were there for him immediately. Credit to Cliff Kingsbury for giving him that. Yeah, they need that. They need that in a big way. And when it comes to the other thing, too, is like we talked about this earlier, the screens were so poorly executed. And that's always a canary in the coal mine for me with offensive coordinators. If you don't really have a good feel for when to call screens, if you don't coach guys up to execute them properly, if you're not hyper aware of your own tells that tell the defense when a screen is coming, and as well as your tendencies, your play calling tendencies, it's going to look really bad in the screen game. And lo and behold, that's what we had. I mean, that might have been, D'Amico as a linebacker, that might have been the thing that probably drove him craziest, was just not having screens. Because as a player, it's so much fun to shut down a screen. It's just the best feeling in the world, because it's almost as good as a sack. You're getting a 4-yard loss, but then you're also taking away an option that they feel good about in the passing game. It's just it's so much fun to shut down a screen. And we gave defenses a steady diet of excitement. We gave defenses so many moments. I can just think of the defensive backs around the league that found out that Bobby Slowik was released. It's like, oh man, I really like that tackle for a loss I had. And it was on Nico Collins. That's hard to do. That's hard to get Nico Collins down behind the line of scrimmage. Pour one out. And I'm not celebrating the loss of Bobby Slowik. I think he's got a future. I think he's super smart. I think he was just too young for this challenge. I'd be fine with never seeing a screen from this team again. No, Corey, don't say it, because you're going to watch the Chiefs play this weekend, and you're going to watch Kareem Hunt get like 47 yards on a screen. Or which running back got the 37-yarder in the regular season game? Whichever running back from the Chiefs that was. You don't dislike screens. You dislike poorly cooked screens. It's just like anything that you didn't like as a kid. You might have realized, like, oh, growing up, I actually do like this food. I just like it better when it's deep fried or cooked by somebody other than my mother, whatever it might be. Yes, we're in agreement. P. Ryan, it was P. Ryan. Yes, thank you. We did have some nice screenplays, but they got called back. To wit, when we talk about attention to detail, this was when Laramie Tunsil was starting to make the turnaround, the really long Nico Collins touchdown that got called back. This is when I started thinking consciously, all right, I'm going to reevaluate some of the grudge I have against Laramie Tunsil. Even though Laramie was to blame because he was illegally downfield, the reason he was illegally downfield was that, A, he committed to faking the run. He took a hard step out. He just overshot it. He took a little too hard of a step or two or three out, so he got past the line of scrimmage. He got to his spot. If I recall properly, he made his block. But then, this is key, when he realized he was the one who was flagged for illegal man downfield, he accepted responsibility. He looked like he felt great shame. And great shame, you don't have greatness without great shame somewhere along the way. You got to find the balance. But no matter how good you are, I remember talking to Tony Baselli about this. Not the Houston Texans version of Tony Baselli, but when we were the Jaguars, when he was an all-pro every year. Baselli was a great example of a guy that I remember talking to him before a game once about how he was a basket case before every game. Like just talking himself out of like, oh, I'm going to suck. Oh, I'm going to suck. Oh, crap. Oh, I'm going to be awful. But then the great ones, they use that to drive them. They always have self-doubt, but they balance it out. I had a similar conversation with Bruce Matthews about how nervous he used to get before games. And he played for like 20 years. So it's that finding that balance of having confidence, but also just hating yourself a smidgen. You don't let it overtake you. You don't let it ruin your life or anything, but just hate yourself a little bit, enough to drive you. And I feel like Laramie hated himself in that moment. And that's good. That's a positive thing. It's that they always leave that part out of the motivational self-help books and everything. They never acknowledge that. They're like, look, at the end of the day, Michael Jordan hates himself a little bit, right? Okay? So, like, you can be great or you can be happy. Choose one. But he's going to, So I was happy to see Laramie miserable in that moment. Like I said earlier, he was shamed into playing better. It was a little bit like hitting rock bottom, I think. If you want to put a positive spin on some of the things this year, I think ultimately it's going to be a really good experience for CJ have gone through. I think he's going to be better, tougher, smarter, and not that he lacked for any of those things, but it's just that you're always getting better as you get older. And he faced some real adversity this year. And, he was very open about it in his press conference. He talked about how, he thought he knew, but he didn't know. You hear that so much in the NFL. Like, guys don't even know what they don't know. Like, they're not even aware of the lessons they'll learn. And just like raising children, there's some things that they just have to learn on their own. And some guys don't necessarily quite get that lesson until later in their career. CJ's got the benefit of having shown how high his ceiling is. So that's there and it's established. I have zero worry about CJ becoming a really, really good, a really consistently good NFL quarterback. But he's also had to manage this season. And I think he understands, I'm just kind of paraphrasing what he said. What I'm about to say is just paraphrasing what he said, which is that he really understands now how hard it is every single season just to be good, and that if you get too wrapped up in wanting to be a 300 level offense and all these different magnificent ways we can have an aerial assault and all of that, you got to always remember, man, it's hard enough just to be good. Like, let's nail down, we got to be sure in training camp that we're good. And then once we prove to ourselves that we're good, then you stack on a little bit more and you stack on a little bit more. And ideally, you get all of that done during training camp. But that's where load management's great and all, but this offensive line just did not spend a whole lot of time out there in training camp. And man, it looked like it during the regular season, obviously. My top OC choice right now is Chip Kelly, but I said this earlier. I want to spend the next 24 hours really just taking a harder look at the potential guys who are out there and who the buzz is about, but also, D'Amico's connections. I think that Chip Kelly, the interesting thing with Chip Kelly will be, does he get interviews as an NFL head coach? Because that might be the holdup. For those of you who don't know, Chip Kelly coached D'Amico for 3 years in Philadelphia. So he has a relationship. And, D'Amico has cited Chip Kelly before as one of his influences, because not a lot of people bring Chip Kelly up as an influence, especially here in Houston, because we're all fixated on the Kubiak side of things, and then Kyle Shanahan, the time he spent with him. But he spent 3 years with Chip Kelly, and that's where D'Amico picked up his affinity for a lot of the sports science stuff. Chip Kelly was very innovative in a lot of ways. He did what very few guys can typically do, is he brought college elements to the NFL and immediately instituted them and had really good success with them offensively. In terms of how the team operated, it puts a lot of stress on the defense. That would be another interesting dynamic with Chip Kelly. But look, has he lost his fastball? I don't know. He just won a national championship as the offensive coordinator with 4 consecutive drives of 70-plus yards. That seemed pretty good to me. It seemed like he still knows how to coach. Am I going to judge him harshly because he couldn't take Cal to a national championship? I will not. I think D'Amico worked the guys too hard in 2023 and then gave them too much time off this past year. We had a talk with Nick Casario when he was on Payne and Pendergast on Sports Radio 610. We had a talk with him about this that was really interesting, because I kind of asked him, in my conversations with, really a lot of guys that I played with that are coaches now, and then other coaches, there's a lot of guys out there that are all in on the GPS tracking and the sports science and everything else. But there's also that element of, man, it's the ultimate team sport. And at some point, you got to find that balance between, all right, yeah, ideally, physiologically, this guy needs a break, but we also suck on offense right now, and we got to figure some things out. And these guys need time to practice and work on things and get better. And that's where, the A.J. Hinch element comes in. And that's where, ideally, that's what D'Amico finds. A.J. Hinch was the perfect, in a lot of ways, A.J. Hinch was the perfect coach for that time in baseball history, because he had an appreciation for the analytics. He had worked in front offices before, but he was also a player. And he could be the conduit between those two worlds in trying to figure out, all right, when do we listen to the analytics? When do we just go with old school know-how and gut feel? And I think that's the challenge in being a coach these days. Yeah, I think, they basically said as much at the end of the year. When they had experimented with short weeks before, they tried it both ways. They tried giving guys a whole boatload of rest, and I think that was before the Jets game, and then they tried working really hard in a short week. And what they realized was that they got to work hard. They got to get out there and practice. And maybe the GPS data tells you that guys need more of a break. We got to get out there and we got to work. We got to maybe get a little bit of thumping in with the pads, and that's what worked for this team. So I think you're exactly right. How do I pronounce your name? Blade? Is that your actual name? That's a really cool name. Hold on, I might steal that for a nephew or daughter. I don't know whether it's not a daughter. Not a daughter. My God, please no. Long gone. Those days are done. But a niece is what I was going to say. I think maybe D'Amico did learn some lessons in that regard. I got too distracted by your cool name to remember what I was talking about. I wonder how long this hire will take. I do too. I would prefer it to be at 8 a.m. on Monday. No, wait. Do I still have a 2-hour show on Monday? I think we do. Okay, I think we still have another couple weeks of 2-hour shows on Monday. I hope that it's at 6:30 a.m. on Tuesday. That would be my ideal scenario, because then we'd have 3.5 hours of easy content, doing interviews with guys who have played for this guy, doing deep dives into his background, his positives, his negatives, all of those things. I would expect... I wouldn't be surprised if they already have a really good feel for who they want. And it might be somebody that they have a prior relationship with. What you might end up waiting on is the guys who have opportunities to be head coaches and want to interview for head jobs, and they're kind of waiting to see what happens there. So it could take a while, and I'm gonna caution myself in advance. I'm not going to get too frustrated if it's taking 2 or 3 weeks, because it very well might be that they've got several qualified candidates that will take the job if they don't get a head coaching job. So that's where we are. Like with Chip Kelly, we'll keep it to Chip Kelly for now, because everybody knows his face. You can latch onto it. It makes sense. Maybe Chip Kelly's waiting to see if somebody wants to interview him for a head coaching job in the NFL. Maybe he's got other suitors on the offensive coordinator side of things. If it's suitors on the offensive coordinator side of things, I would say money whip the hell out of him. Get him in here. D'Amico, give him some of your money. Just get him the hell in here. If he's waiting to see if there's a head coach job out there, then it might not materialize. Of the NFL head coach openings right now, NFL head coach positions open right now, I think that you gotta look and wonder, all right, just as it was in, does Chip Kelly, if he makes a stab back at being a head coach, it might be better to bide his time, show that he's still got his hot hand as an offensive coordinator, and then wait for the right opportunity to show up. I don't think there's a chance in hell that Chip Kelly really sees himself working well with Jerry Jones. I also don't think that Jerry Jones would want a guy like Chip Kelly who's got a set of testicles and will say no to things. So I don't know if that would be a good fit. So I don't think we have to worry about that. New Orleans Saints, if it's not going to be Derek Carr, it would be somebody else that would be an unknown. Would he rather be the head coach? And the Saints still have to work their way through some of these residual salary cap issues. So it's not as likely to be a quick turnaround. I think he would rather be the offensive coordinator than the Texans. So, I didn't hear his name bandied about anywhere else. So, again, just to stick to Chip Kelly, hypothetically, I think that might be a pretty easy hire. I think that Chip Kelly would be able to look at that and think, all right, yeah, look, okay, yeah, I can do better than Bobby Slowik, for sure. Let me watch a little film of this C.J. Stroud. Yep, I feel good about that. And you could do it pretty quickly, unless somebody starts trying to lure him in. For those of you who don't know, both of those guys are gone. I'm not sure if you're aware of that or if that's a point about something else. So Chris Strausser is gone, as well as Bobby Slowik. As far as whose fault is it, there were some things the offensive line did where, man, just the footwork and some of the ways they operated, it was hard for me not to look at the offensive line coach as a problem. There's other things where I did wonder, what exactly is their plan here, and what is Bobby Slowik asking them to do? There were ways, I know Clint and I talked about this earlier in the season, we were trying to figure out exactly what their rules were. And I know Clint's got a couple coaching buddies that I know he leaned heavily on. And, and I would talk to some of my old offensive line friends about just exactly how they were handling adjusting to the movement on the defensive line in the run game. And it was very curious, and it wasn't the standard deal. And that's where I wonder, all right, does Bobby Slowik really know what he's looking for, what he's engineering, all of that? The Texans didn't have a run game coordinator. Not that that's a necessity or anything, but sometimes that can be good as a guy that's kind of that he's a conduit, to overuse that term today, between the offensive line coach and the offensive coordinator. There's times where you got to be able to tell the offensive coordinator, like, listen, man, I think that's just too hard to pull off in real time. Or other times where the offensive coordinator's got to be able to say, look, no, you got to coach these guys differently. This is why is Blake Fisher jump setting, like all these things. it makes sense that maybe it was a mixture, a toxic mixture of both. Oh, Josh McCown. Okay, so Josh. All right. Josh is interesting because there's an emotional trigger there for some people. Josh is the quarterback's coach for a quarterback who did very well this year in Sam Darnold. Kind of resurrected his career. I just want to be sure of what his position was for sure. So if Josh McCown, if they elevated him or anything already, yeah, he's quarterback's coach this year. I haven't seen anything about him not being the quarterback's coach. So you could totally go after him. As far as Josh McCown picking Bryce over CJ, I don't know, man. Like that wasn't Josh's spot on the depth chart there in the coaching tree at that point. I don't know. You'll never. I know there's all kinds of theories about how it all went down with Bryce Young and CJ Stroud that I feel like people have adopted too much as actual fact. Where I think it's anytime you're talking about Dave Tepper and the Panthers, I think things are way messier and murkier than might even leak to the public. And Frank Reich's not the kind of guy that's going to do a tell-all necessarily, not a 100% tell-all. So I think that Josh McCown, given where he was at his stage in his career in Carolina, it was the first time he was a full-time assistant coach, that he was probably going to be happy with either of those guys. But and I remember he did, before he had taken a coaching job, he had done a film breakdown of CJ, and I believe had some really nice things to say about CJ. Regardless, I don't have any issues at all with Josh McCown for having accepted an interview to be a head coach when he had no business being a head coach. That's on Jack Easterby. And frankly, on Nick Caserio as well, who is still under whatever weird spell Jack Easterby has on people. I think there was a weird dynamic. The fact that remember, that was not fake news. Josh McCown was a finalist for the Texans head coaching job. How do we know that? Because the source was the Houston Texans themselves. They issued it in a press release that he was a finalist for the job. Having zero experience as a full-time paid coach at any level, I think he had helped out with his kid's high school team that year or something. He was being considered for the head coaching job. I don't put any of that on Josh McCown. I think Josh McCown, look, somebody calls you up and says like, hey, how do you feel about interviewing for this job where you might make like $6 or $7 million a year guaranteed over the course of 5 years? I'm gonna be honest with you. I'd talk myself into being qualified right quick. I'd be qualified AF. I would roll in there. You know what I would do? I'm going to do it. I'm going to give you I'm going to tell you exactly how I would do it. This is how I should have gotten the Jaguars job. I should have said, hey, look at these guys like Mike Vrabel and Dan Campbell and D'Amico Ryans and Aaron Glenn. Everybody's hiring a former player, especially defensive ones. I'm going to ask AI, give me a list of reasons that Seth Payne, I got to put former Texans player Seth Payne because there's a defensive line coach who coaches in college whose name is also Seth Payne. Former Texans player Seth Payne would be a good hire for the Cowboys job. You guys are going to be astounded at how good I sound as a candidate because I did this with Ross Tucker earlier. Oh, what the hell? There's no information available in the context that supports the claim that Seth Payne would be a good hire for the Cowboys job. Oh my God. This is the most encouraging thing I've seen out of AI yet. Oh my gosh. Usually oh my gosh. Damn you, AI. I can't even fake my way into it. All right. Let's see. Texans seem to be burdened by injuries also lately, hindering the ability to perform optimally. They were about middle of the road for injuries during the season. You know what they were hindered by? Suspensions. They were heavily suspended this year. Danico Autry had his suspension. We had Mario Edwards. Wait, am I blanking on defense? Mario Edwards suspension, right? We had, I don't know if you guys remember, Aziz Alshire suspended for 3 games. That was a big part of it. Injuries, until the end of the year, the Texans were about middle of the road on injuries. So I would make excuses for the Lions on the injury front because they had extreme injuries. any given year in the NFL, it feels like your team has been burdened by the most injuries in the NFL. I guarantee you there's fans up in Baltimore who was remarkably healthy this year. I guarantee you there's people up there that are like, what the hell with all these injuries? Just sick of it. Every week somebody's getting injured. Damn it. I'm devastated that even AI couldn't come up with a reason. Ross Tucker, he spit me out. Let me tell you the reasons that Ross Tucker was going to be a good head coach. If I've still got it in here. My God. It's just unbelievable. Ross Tucker is an O-line coach. That made good sense. Okay, how about as a defensive line coach? This should be better. Because they gave me a long list for Ross Tucker. So I'm willing to work my way up the ladder. I might just start off as a defensive coordinator and then move to head coach. Ironically enough, it would be way harder to start off as a defensive coordinator than it would be as a head coach in the NFL. Starting off as a head coach in the NFL is the one that you could most easily bull snark your way through. To get the job too. All you got to learn is learn how to sidle up to an owner, tell them all the right things, memorize your points from AI. I've got, first, this is how AI is horrible at sports. It says Seth Payne played 7 seasons in the league. I played 10. Does that not seem like a pretty easy thing to get statistically? The other day I asked for a list of Hall of Fame players from small college football programs, and one of the names they put out was Ed Reed, who went to the very tiny football program, University of Miami. And the only thing I can figure is that the university itself is kind of small compared to the big state schools, but my God, it's awful at sports. Awful. I've got specific knowledge from playing defensive tackle, motivational potential. I'm a former player. Potential challenges, scheme fit, because the Cowboys might be looking for a coach with experience in a specific defensive scheme, which Payne might not have. You know what? Yeah, a lot of good Mike Zimmer's experience did for you. How'd that work out for you? You need to go with something different. You need to go with something fresh, something new, something that's never been tried before. You need a little Seth Payne in your life, Jerry Jones. I'll take the job for $4 million, no less. Yeah, the suspension sucked. You know it's bad when at one point we had John Harris on in the preseason or in the pregame before one of the games, and he said, the defensive line right now is the least injured and the least suspended it's been all season. This team, I'm going to tell you, there's a stat floating around right now that the Texans were fined or suspended for a total of $3 million this season. So players were either fined or players lost salary because of suspensions to the tune of $3 million. The total for the NFL was $12 million. So the Texans were a heavily fined and suspended bunch this season. The one little codicil there is that the Texans, $2 million of that was Danico Autry's suspension. So that took a big chunk out of it. But it was still the Texans. If you take Danico Autry out of it, out of the total for the league and the total for the Texans still had $1 million in fines with $10 million in fines and suspensions in the league. So 10%, where the average team would have about 3%. So they're still getting fined and or suspended at the tune of 3 times as much money as the rest of the league. I say all that to tell you this. This team is developing a reputation for violence, and I'm here for it. Love it. Want every bit of it. Got no issues with it. I am okay with it, especially if they tweak the QB slide rule. If they can tweak it to make it a more enforceable and logical and reasonable version of the rule, I'm okay with it. They've just got to tweak it. It's physiologically impossible to play defense the way the slide rule is currently constructed. We've seen that a couple times now. So if they do that, be the team that offenses know, like, oh crap, that quarterbacks know, like, I got to keep an eye on that Aziz Elshire. I got to keep an eye on that Jalen Petrie. I'm cool with that. I'd just love to see a little bit more of that on offense. I'd like to see some unnecessary roughnesses on the offensive side of the ball for fewer false starts. Let's do like a 1-to-3 ratio. So then the yardage all works out. Let's get rid of 3 of those false starts, and then drive somebody over a pile once. get rid of 3 more false starts or illegal procedures, and then punch somebody in the face because he hit CJ late. Just give me a little of that in my life, and I'm cool. That's the ratio you shoot for. Like I want a certain percentage of my penalties and fines to be aggressive in nature. I like there to be a little bit of violence. I've been watching a lot of Netflix lately. I just watched American Primeval, and now I'm on the Dirty Black Bag. So I'm ready to go out west and shoot a bunch of settlers, whether they deserve it or not. Okay? Because I got to get mine. Damn it! Got a family to provide for. How many times, if any, were you suspended? Never. They never pinned anything on me. You hear? What do you know? What do you know? Just don't shut your trap. The only times I can only remember once that I was fined. And for anybody joining the stream, we're here talking about Bobby Slowik, but we took a little bit of brief detour. We'll get back to Bobby Slowik. This is the only time I was fined that I can remember by the league. It was a preseason game. See, Ricky Williams running the ball. We tackle Ricky Williams for a loss. Of course we did. I was in the game, and Ricky fumbled as he hit the ground. So it wasn't a fumble. The ball popped out as he was on his back. The rules emphasis in a video that we had just watched like a week prior during training camp, one of the rules emphasis that year was, hey, after a play, hand the ball to an official or leave it where the play ended. We don't want to be chasing the footballs all over the place. So I'm like, I'm a good kid. I try to do the right thing. So I tackled Ricky. The ball comes out, and it just kind of popped right up into me. Like I grabbed it just in case there was no whistle or something. My chance for glory. And I looked to the left, no official to hand the ball to. Look to the right, no official to hand the ball to. So I start to get up, and Ricky's still laying on his back, and I just kind of dropped the ball. Ricky got pissed because it dropped right on his chest. He thought I was taunting him. Maybe subconsciously I was a little bit. But Ricky got pissed. Ricky, of all people. He was probably stoned that moment, and he got pissed. Got up and just got up in my face and everything. And I was honestly too shocked to even be angry about it. I was like, what are you angry about? The way it looked on television was that totally what Ricky thought it looked like. It looked like I looked around to see if anybody was watching, and then it was like, eh. And to the point where I remember Jay Bernetti, the equipment manager, told me that his wife called me devious when he got home. She's like, that Seth Payne is devious. And then Jay was like, no, Seth is not devious. Seth will tell you exactly how he feels about things. And he's actually a pretty swell fella, too. So that was the only time I got fined that I can remember. I knocked an official out once in a game, but it was not out of malice. It was because he got in my way, and they didn't fine me for that. So that was cool. I wasn't fast enough to get to the quarterback in time to hit him dirty like. All right, theory Bobby held out on game plans because of all the hype of as a head coach in 2023. Brian, I don't know if that's your theory or something you saw on the internet, but I would stop putting it out there. I think that's just not something that happens. It doesn't make any sense, for one. That's come on, Brian. We know this. Like that's not. No, that doesn't make any sense at all. Brian, please tell me you don't believe that. We're getting to a stage in this country where it's too easy. I feel like people have started to look at conspiracy theories as a valid form of logic. And they're putting the conspiracy theory ahead of the logic. Because I'll listen to conspiracy theories, but it's got to be rooted first in something that makes sense. Like motivationally. What's the motivation for somebody to have concocted this conspiracy? And for the life of me, I can't figure out what the motivation would be for that. That's, no, because obviously it blew up in his face if that were the case. That's just not the way it works. Successful taunt, yeah. I don't know if you're talking about me or Brian. All the Texans players' fines should be donated for Walter Payton Man of the Year for all that money donated. Oh, they should be donated. Yeah, for those of you who don't know, the fines do not go to the league. They all go to charities. I don't know if they still do it this way or not in terms of there used to be a list of charities that were accepted that you could give it to. You know, they didn't want somebody going out and donating their money to the Seth Payne Legal Defense Fund or the Seth Payne Congressional Super PAC or anything like that. You gotta give it to one of these approved charities that are actual charities. Rant on people that say I seen too. I love the societal rants. I'm okay with people who say I seen. I grew up around I grew up around people who say I seen. I'm not, and some of them the smartest people I know. It's a cultural thing, you know? I try not to, if there's grammatical inaccuracies, but now, if you say I seen, but you're in an environment where you really shouldn't be saying I seen, like if you're a teacher, then we got to talk, all right? You can't be a teacher saying I seen. Now, you can say it on the weekend. You can say it down by the river. You can say it as you're picking up your children or whatever, but like from your deadbeat husband's trailer, whatever it might be. But no, I got too many people I grew up with who say I seen and are also brilliant in like different walks of life, but way smarter than me in so many ways. So I can't do it. Whereas like my dad, like there was a part in the when I was growing up, there was one stretch where my dad, who was brilliant, we were living in an old rusted out trailer in the middle of nowhere in North Carolina. I think he was renting a farm or renting some land to farm like at that time. And it was funny because it was like, that's like, all right. I just learned that from my dad. Like he was very unassuming and didn't put on any airs and everything. He's one of the smartest people I ever knew. But he also was like totally cool with just living in the woods for broad stretches of times, just out in the woods basically as an outdoorsman, or living in busted out trailers or half dilapidated houses he was fixing up. So I was exposed to a lot of like super brilliant people that he knew that were people who said I seen. 15 million of these quarterbacks can take a few hits if they want to run. Yeah, I'm with you, bro. Okay, American Primeval, is it good? It's a question. Are you Mormon? Because if you're Mormon, I don't think you're going to like it. And it's based in Utah back when they had the settler wars. The federal government was trying to disband or take land away from the Mormons. The Mormons were trying to become their own country. There were conflicts anywhere and everywhere by various Native American tribes, sometimes against each other, sometimes at the behest of the Mormons and everything. So I know a lot of Mormons have a different version of the way things went down. I think this American Primeval shows the version that I don't know I haven't done enough deep dive to know what's more historically accurate or not. It was a mess out there, but it's an awesome series. I liked it a lot. I was surprised. I think it got lower ratings on Rotten Tomatoes, partly I think because the trailer for it makes it look like the way they treated Native Americans in the old Hollywood. Like you watch the trailer and you're like, oh, apparently this is about Native Americans just massacring people, when it's way more complicated than that. And they treat it, it's like all these good cable series. Like you see the complexity and the difficulty of, following moral codes that conflict with each other and all these things. It's really well done. And they don't try to paint out any one group as morally superior to the other. And well, okay, they do a little bit. I mean, there's some definite villains there. So anyway, yeah, I recommend it. I think the Rotten Tomatoes had a lot of people that were like virtue signaling in their reviews because the audience score is very high, and then the critics have some critics that are very, very high on it, and then others that basically go into they want to be your anthropology professor and explain to you how, like, oh no, what you think about Native American history is not correct. It's like, are we really that? Is there anybody? There's nobody. There's nobody in America anymore that like believes the 1950s version of the Old West. Are there? Like, it's like, come on. Railing against a straw man. A strong straw man. All right, back to Bobby. All right, want to see Texans introduce the VR system? Yes. Yes, Cody. Want to see the Texans introduce the virtual reality system that Jaden uses. It's a good way to get mental reps with a new playbook. Hold on, I've got a little space heater in here. I got too excited. I don't need the space heater anymore. My wife she wants to be an Inuit. Okay, this system, this is what all went down. So Jaden Daniels transfers to LSU. Meanwhile, there's this group of German scientists who've created a virtual reality training system for soccer players. And it's incredible. Works really, really well. And then these krauts are like, I wonder if we could do this with American football. So they called up some colleges, and LSU was one of them. And LSU was like, yeah, sounds good to me. Let's see what you got. And they worked with LSU I want to say they worked with LSU for a couple years to kind of refine this for those scientists to learn American football, what they needed to see, and they got it to the point where, I mean, they can put the quarterback to not just look at, NPCs out there, but like they can tweak it so that defensive backs play with the same leverage, with the same the same depth of receivers, all of this stuff. Like they can tailor it to the specific opponent, and it put Jaden Daniels' development into warp speed. And I think that's why there were people that were a little hesitant to really buy into Jaden Daniels, because his film in his last year there at LSU was so much different from early in his career, that they're wondering, like, all right, is this just one of those one-hit wonders that was just everything was right and he had really good receivers to throw to and it was just kind of flukish, or is he genuinely that much improved? And it turns out he's that much improved. Now, Jaden and CJ are very good friends. I wish I should have told somebody to ask that in the press conference. Somebody's got to ask that about CJ at some point. If I were the Texans, I would sink whatever amount of money it takes into getting that system. I think it's a really one of the biggest problems with American football is, in terms of getting better at it, is that it's really hard to practice at full speed. It's a collision sport. Rugby you can practice at relatively full speed because there aren't actually that many collisions in rugby. And so especially you can practice at full speed, and if you're not tackling to the ground, you're getting a pretty good simulation of the game. American football, because there's so many collisions on every single play, like in rugby, blocking isn't legal, for instance. So all of those offensive linemen and everybody else that would be out on a football field, there's none of that going on. So all of those collisions that happen every single play, you just cannot practice it at full speed. So the quarterbacks don't get the same feel for it. As much as you can introduce VR in a way that doesn't harm their development, yes. I feel where the future is. I think the quarterbacks that are willing to spend heavy hours in the simulator, I think that can go a long, long way. So, yeah, you got me excited, Cody. Got me out of my American primeval. Yeah, and as far as pilots in the military, right, Tony, and that's the difference. Like, it sounds counterintuitive, I suppose. It's in a lot of ways, well, for one, there hasn't been the same financial incentive or resources to do it in football, because like when you're doing it for the military and you're spending billions and billions of dollars already, yeah, they've got lots of resources to develop all that. And then the airlines obviously have a lot of incentive to train their pilots as efficiently as possible. Where in football, you got so many independent operators out there. Every little football is you've got, yes, in the aggregate, the NFL is gigantic and it's $20 billion a year or whatever, but it's each of those teams and their budgets. It's hard for them to really sink a boatload of money into something like that, so it's come along a little bit slower. And then it does sound counterintuitive, but I think it's true. It's a little bit more complicated in some ways or in different ways with a sport that involves humans, 22 separate humans, and it changes. The rules change every single week. It's just a lot more labor intensive, I think. You can't just put together a program for an F-14 and then there you have it and you just tweak it every now and then. You got to really change a lot. So anyway, yes, it's 100%. Going back to, so we're talking for those of you, let me pull up the other one here. For those of you just joining us, we were talking about the virtual reality system that Jaden Daniels uses. So originally when they started flying airplanes and when they first started using them in combat in World War I, all of a sudden they were building a bunch of airplanes, but there was nobody that actually knew how to fly an airplane. So they just would. This is how they would screen for whether you were going to be a good pilot or not. And mind you, these are tail draggers, which are much harder to control than the tricycle landing gear that you see. So they would basically say, hey, here's the basics of how everything works. Let's throw you in that airplane and see if you can fly her. And you would either crash and die or you would successfully fly it. And the military, in all its wisdom, thought we'd like these guys to at least die in combat. So they started creating simulators. So that's the other difference with, like, obviously with the airplanes. There's a life or death element there. I've talked to flight instructors. One of my friends from college was a flight instructor in the Air Force for a long time, and he talked about how, like, yeah, he dies like 10 times a day, like, because you can go out and put everybody in all these situations, and you make mistakes, you die, and then you go out and do it again. And with football, it's kind of the similar thing. You can't practice football full speed because too many people would be dying, almost literally. Probably if you did it every single day full speed, yeah, people would die, but there would definitely be way too many injuries. That's where simulation is 100% the future there. Trade Schultz for a third rounder. I thought if you die in VR, you die in real life. It does feel that way if you ever do one of those ones where you're standing precariously at the top of something. It's amazing, like, how cowardly I was the first time I did a VR thing. I'll only be excited if someone comes in that has experience calling plays and owning an offense. I am 100% with you on that one. I like Gerard Johnson. I think Gerard Johnson's got a really bright future. This team, the Texans, has a head coach who's in his third year. You have a quarterback who's going into his third year. You're going to have a center next year. Likely, it's probably going to be Patterson or Scruggs, who's going into his second year as a full-time starter, or third. If you have Patterson played a bunch last year, whatever it might be. Still very young players. And that's one of the problems looking back on it that a lot of you were worried about, and I think you've been proven correct. Man, at times these last couple of years, you had a rookie or second year center pitching, snapping the ball to a quarterback who was in his first or second year, and an offensive coordinator who was in his first or second year over these last 2 years. That's a lot of youth at really, really important positions, especially the positions that are, like, vitally need to be some of your most intelligent players on the team. If you've got young, intelligent dudes, that's great, but they don't have any experience doing what they're doing in their role. And there's not a lot to lean on. If CJ had come in and Chris Myers was the center, and then you had a more experienced offensive coordinator, then okay, CJ can be a rookie, but he's got experienced guys right in that center line, from the coach standing in the end zone to CJ to the center, and it feels a lot better. So right now, I go back to Gary Kubiak. When it clicked for the Texans with Gary Kubiak, Kubiak was an offensive-minded head coach. The Texans hired, after experiments with a couple of defensive coordinators that did not work out at all, they hired Wade Phillips, who could be the head coach of the defense. And that's a little too trite to say, I guess, or quaint, but that's what he was. Like, he was able to handle a lot of those things, and that's what I think the Texans need right now. That's why Chip Kelly is so appealing to me. Just by experience, his experience as a head coach, everything. It becomes an extra mentor to your head coach, and that's very valuable. So more gray hair in the building, I'm all for that. Kelsey and Hurts. I don't know what we need a proven OC that is a leader of men with proven experience. I'm with you there, Tom Jones. Keenum is doing backup for Wasp Nest Spring right now, so not him. Yeah, he's good. I tried to talk him into trying to really, parlay that into a full-time gig, which, in Hollywood, full-time gig just means he's going to have to go off and shoot some commercials a few times a year, and then he could coach and be a progressive spokesperson. I think that would actually be good. I think that would be good. I'd be proud of him. Let's see. Oh, team president. Yeah, that's on the business side of things. That doesn't affect football operation. Like, honestly, long term, it affects football operations because you want to be sure you have cash to operate with and everything like all that. But in the short term, that's not really a big deal. I like Greg Grissom a lot. I think he just had philosophical differences, perhaps. Doesn't feel like it was particularly acrimonious. I think there might have just been different visions for where they wanted to go or how they wanted to get there. So the Texans have always been fine on the business side of things. Sometimes they've been so good on the business side of things that they've been criticized for it, right? We know that. I think there's one big difference between Cal and Bob is that Cal has been way more free spending on free agency, and I think in a lot of the player programs type of stuff, including some of the things Easterby suggested, as much as as much as you want to believe that, or that I want to believe sometimes that Easterby did nothing but awful things, he did do some good things. One of them was like kind of a virtual reality training system that they used. I'm not sure if they're currently still using it. And some of the improvements they made to the cafeteria and the weight room, that was stuff that Bob McNair was a little bit tighter with. And Cal, I think, is more like, hey, let's go win some football games. You know, ultimately, you win a championship, and it's amazing how much your bottom line improves. Let's see. Is Chip Kelly the main target that fits the criteria? I feel like I'm getting a headache trying to think of others that fit the experienced leader on offense criteria. It shouldn't be this hard. No, well, everybody at some point there, once they've got experience, you know, it's like, hey, listen, if you're in your 40s and you marry another woman who's in her 40s, like, listen, don't spend a whole lot of time trying to go over the body count or anything, all right? We've all done things. We've all been places. We're building a new life together. So any coach you see is going to have had like either good experiences and bad experiences, and you just don't worry too much about it. I'm going to do an offensive coordinator episode tomorrow or Sunday. There are a couple of big football games on Sunday. At some point tomorrow, I'll do that. I did. Drew Hodgson and I broke down the 8 sacks from the Texans game, which was a rip-roaring good time. Actually did make me feel better in some ways when we kind of isolated down to like, all right, well, this is coachable. This is fixable. This guy probably not long for the Texans, so he's going to get replaced. So I actually felt better, even though I watched 8 sacks, 5 of which were in the fourth quarter. It hadn't penetrated my brain that 5 of those 8 sacks were in the fourth quarter, and that the deluge. I mean, I knew it was awful in the fourth quarter. It's hard to remember 5 sacks in one single quarter. It's a faster pace than you're typically used to. Mike McCarthy or Doug Peterson? Mike McCarthy gets interesting. Okay, Mike McCarthy. It was when Mike McCarthy took over play calling that Dak really kind of took a leap, which is interesting because what's his face? That's Kellen Moore. That's the favorite at the time right now, unless he got hired. Been streaming for 2 hours, I guess. Mike McCarthy or Doug Peterson? I would say Mike McCarthy. If I had to choose between those two, I think Doug Peterson has done his best work getting brief stretches of awesomeness out of physically talented but limited passers. Does that make sense? Except that Nick Foles, I would say he wasn't as gifted athletically, but he was limited in some ways. He's been really good at kind of, I think, capturing what there might be there, but then not taking guys above and beyond it. With Trevor Lawrence, when Trevor Lawrence had that really good stretch, it's like, all right, they engineered up a bunch of good ways for him to get rid of the ball quickly, but when defenses started to figure out where he wanted to go with his first read, they never really progressed beyond that level. Whereas Mike McCarthy, it's a little too easy to just say, oh, that was all Aaron Rodgers in Green Bay. Like, look, it was both of them, and then things moved apart. But when Mike McCarthy was more hands-on with the offense in Dallas, I thought you saw some growth from it. So if I had to choose between those two, I would say Mike McCarthy. Mike LaFleur, I know I just talked about getting past people's blemishes, but I don't know if I'm quite there yet with Mike LaFleur. Now, Mike LaFleur was kind of put into a tough situation with, let me look at LaFleur's actual resume and see what titillates me or worries me the most. So, passing game coordinator with the 49ers. Yeah, they should go hire a guy who is a passing game coordinator for the 49ers. Like maybe the guy whose successor was Bobby Slowik, because we know that's Kyle Shanahan's offense. He was the passing game coordinator from 2019 to 2020, offensive coordinator with the Jets, and then is he not under contract? Yeah, I'm blanking here. I guess if you're just looking at it, it's Sean McVay's offense, but he is the offensive coordinator, so it's a lateral move. I was thinking he was like the quarterback's coach or something with the Rams. So I don't know about that. I don't know if it's even possible to go after Mike LaFleur. If he's nominally the offensive coordinator, which means you can't go after him. Even if Sean McVay's the actual offensive coordinator, this guy's title is offensive coordinator. I thought he was the quarterback's coach. Clint Kubiak or any of the Kubiaks, that would be interesting. Okay, you're giving me good names. Now, I'm not. Stop it, Isaac. Silly. Yeah, I think I just fell off the D's Nuts truck. Come on. Yeah, Josh McCown, it was honestly not even on my radar, and he's still raw. I guess the big thing is I've been kind of railing against going with a first-time offensive coordinator, and he falls into that boat. I think Josh McCown has a bright future as a coach in the NFL. Everybody I've ever met that knows him just loves him, and I never got angry at Josh McCown specifically. I got angry at the idea that he should be hired as the Texans head coach without ever having coached full-time before. I thought and continue to think that was one of the most ludicrous things I've ever seen in the history of sport. Not just American football or European football or any other, just sport in general. And I watched High-a-Lie. It's ludicrous. So my rule right now is I don't want a first-time offensive coordinator. I want an old head. I need an old head in the building. Now, I know I've been having fun calling it football, Jose. I don't know why. I think it's J.J. Watt's influence. Wes Phillips. Okay, I'm going to write Wes Phillips down. I'm going to write Josh McCown down, if only to shoot it down later, unless somebody comes up with a good idea. Kubiak. Let's see. Now that I got your attention, wide receiver. And that's kind of the way the wide receivers are playing out this year. And I know it's kind of the flavor of the day that like, oh, wow, there's a lot of really good wide receivers doing stuff in the league in the late, Brian Robinson, et cetera, late first round or in the second round. And I think that that makes the most sense. I think that might be the sweet spot in the draft for him this year. And you can't depend on Tank Dell being back. You can't. Oh wait, not Brian Robinson. Who am I thinking of? Anyway, you guys know who I'm thinking of. But you can't count on Tank Dell being back at the beginning of 2025, certainly. And I'm in my timeline with how bad that injury was. I'm kind of looking at him as kind of getting a medical red shirt next year. We'll see. And I would say even if you re-signed Stephon Diggs, which I'm hesitant to endorse right now, you got to recognize he's 31 years old coming off of an ACL, and there's a good chance that either he or Nico gets injured at some point. They got to draft a wide receiver. I just give a rookie wide receiver a chance to form a relationship with CJ Stroud, and with a new offensive coordinator, do everything you can to do that. That's what I'd like. Let's see. Just because Landry wants McCown doesn't mean it's a good choice. Hell no, I don't want him. I wasn't aware that Landry wanted McCown. Do I have a reputation of just endorsing whatever Landry says? I don't feel like that's my reputation. I'm my own man, damn it. Okay, Golden, Egbuka. All right, I've already got enough. There's no way in hell I'm going to do all these guys proper justice. Let's see. Seth, I'm celebrating. Oh, I know you. Listen. I know you are. Where is he? Yes, I know you are. I try not to be jubilant in moments like this after people get cut or fired, unless they're genuine a-holes. If you're a genuine a-hole and you get fired, then yeah, I'll dance a dance of triumph. I'll do the gritty, damn it. I've been working on it for 3 years. Patellar tendonitis came back because I was trying to learn how to do the gritty. And after I conquer the gritty, I'm going to learn that little one where it looks like you're hovering. Oh, Ragone. Ragone, who is currently with the Rams or the Chargers. Where is he? He's somewhere out west. So Dave Ragone, former third-round pick of the Texans. Third round, right? Quarterback. Good dude. I'll tell you something about Ragone. Here, let's just pull these up. I'm being selfish. You guys are getting way too much of my face. Let's pull up Ragone. Or Rag One, as I like to call him. He is super bright. He is a guy that I think, as a young player, I was impressed with him by his maturity. Where I was an old dude when he was a rookie, and I liked Ragone because he was very frugal, which sounds silly, right? I know, but he's like one of these guys that drove his old beat-up station wagon that was his parents from 1978. I think probably the entire time he was in the NFL. but he was also a guy that I could tell he was really bright, but he just wasn't that gifted as an actual athlete. Why is this not showing? There we go. There's where we're going. So he's in his first season with the LA Rams as the quarterback's coach. He has been in quite a few spots in the NFL. So he would be a first-time coordinator, but it's not like he'd be he has more experience in the NFL than Bobby Slowik. He didn't take 3 years to work at Pro Football Focus or anything. So you guys will all remember the work he did with the Hartford Colonials. That was good stuff. Passing game coordinator with the Falcons. He was the offensive coordinator with the Falcons. Now I feel like a stupid son of a bitch. All right, so, okay, Ragon's on the list for sure. I'll be biased because I like him. I thought he was like pass game coordinator that whole time with the Falcons. Ragon might be the guy. Now, does Dave know? Yeah, Dave was there with D'Amico too. I want to say, or was he not? Dave definitely knows D'Amico just because he's friends with a lot of those guys from the 2006 draft class. Oh, you know where I could find out information about him as a player and when he was in the league? Yeah, thanks. 2003 through 2005. I'm open to it. You've given me enough names. I'm going to stick with the ones you gave me already. John Gruden, not likely. I don't know. Does John, there's no way John Gruden's expected. I don't think John Gruden's got his hat in the ring to be a coach right now, just by virtue of the content he's putting out online. He's just talking. He's like Rex Ryan almost now, where he's saying stuff and criticizing coaches in a way that very few coaches do when they go into media. And I feel like once you cross that bridge, it's because you're like, I'm not going back. I know Rex will claim that he wants the Jets job and everything, but I feel like he's I would say no. Okay, Corey. Here's how I feel about Dan Orlovsky. No. So I think Dan Orlovsky is very smart, but he's also never been an offensive coordinator. And that's number one right now is I want a guy that's not learning on the job with a young and talented quarterback who's probably going to get a huge contract after this next season. I want to get the absolute most out of C.J. Stroud. I don't want somebody where there's any kind of a learning curve. And the other is this, and this is where I've always gone with, is that I don't like talking about dudes who aren't in coaching because by far, the biggest prerequisite to being a coach, a good coach, whether you're in high school, college, or the NFL, is to have a desperate urge to coach. And I don't think Orlovsky's ever really shown that, at least to get in on the NFL side. I think he coaches high school at some, I'm not sure. So I would say no. Now, having said that, hey, Frank Reich spent like decades out of football before he got into it, but he didn't just hop right in as an offensive coordinator. So that's a hard no for me from Orlovsky. It's a name, though, so I should probably discuss it. I should definitely put it on a thumbnail. I should definitely say, the Texans are idiots if they don't hire Dan Orlovsky. Something like that. That's the way you get ahead these days. Yeah. Rex Ryan as an offensive coordinator. That would be awesome. That's honestly, I've seen this happen twice now. It happened with Andy Reid in Philadelphia at the end, and it happened with Bill Belichick, where at the end of a very long and esteemed career at their place, obviously Belichick more than Andy Reid, the last year Andy Reid was in Philly, he had Juan Castillo, the O-line coach, be the defensive coordinator. He'd never been a defensive coordinator before, if I recall properly. And he'd been an O-line coach forever. And he just had him like, I don't know, you go ahead and take care of the defense. And then Belichick, you think about it, you lose Josh McDaniels, you can't get Bill O'Brien, so what you go with is a tag team of your special teams coordinator and defensive coordinator to work with your young quarterback. And I feel like if you're an owner, as soon as your head coach who's been there forever suggests that, you got to be like, all right, well, this guy's emotionally checked out or something because, man, this is phoning it in to an extreme degree. So, yeah, that's how I feel about stuff like that. I know you're joking about Rex Ryan, but YouTube Seth is greater than 6'10 Seth. I disagree with that. I'll take it. That's your opinion, and you can totally have your opinion and agree with it. One thing I've learned in sports media and on sports radio is that Everybody is 100% genuinely, I say this with no sarcasm, they are the world's foremost expert in what they actually enjoy listening to. So I don't fight it. If somebody doesn't like me, that's cool. So it makes sense. For whatever reason, they don't like me. If somebody loves me, I acknowledge how smart they are for liking me, but I also know that, it comes and it goes. So if you like me more on YouTube than 610, then so be it. I take no offense to that. Yeah, the Texans are idiots if they don't hire this coach. That's the hot take to get the clicks. I tried to lean into I can't lean into the negativity anymore, man. I can't lean into the clickbait. The nice thing about YouTube is that it's like longer form, and I feel like there's more of an appetite for people that do want discussion or at least nuanced take. Yeah, you go ahead and try to make a nuanced point on Twitter these days or Instagram or anywhere else and just have fun in your mentions. God forbid you make a joke and set something up with a sarcastic statement. Like, people don't read past the damn first half sentence. So the nice thing, if any of you youngsters out there are thinking about still getting into the sports media, A, no. But B, I'm joking, because B is sports radio is still going to be viable for a long, long time because of that same thing, because the people that listen to sports radio tend to be adults who have attention spans. And I know what you're thinking. No, they're all dumb jamokes. They're like, no, they're people who have jobs who are driving on their way to work and they have disposable income. And they also listen to the hosts for so many hours in a week that the endorsements tend to work more effectively. So like a sports radio listener is way more valuable to an advertiser than like 10 music station listeners. It's just, so we don't get the same ratings as music stations, but there's just, so like the business model, it's like the one thing in radio that's still really, really viable, or one of the things, like political talk is the other one. And the other side of it is that it's just so super easy to like, oh yeah, we also stream, we also podcast, we also do all those things. So the business model, depending on whether it doesn't matter whether people are listening to it on the radio or through an app or on YouTube or whatever, like it's a model that works, and we're just lucky enough that our platform transfers seamlessly. Whereas print media is a little bit different, and a lot of other things is just different. Music is just all over the place. Yeah, why is Seth? You'll be shocked at what Seth Payne is suggesting. That's a good one too. Ability to agree to disagree. Yeah, on sports radio, I think. I think the one thing too that's changed with sports radio is that the tone has changed a lot because the internet has humbled the hosts. Like, we have to be on the internet as part of our jobs. It's hard not to be on social media as part of our jobs. You can do it, but I feel like now, because I try to limit my social media now just to a healthy amount, to try to spend the right amount of time, because it gets toxic super fast, or you get into rabbit holes way too quickly. But it used to be back in the day, before the listeners had internet and before there was social media and everything, blowhards could get up and basically, I'm going to tell you how it is. And then like coaches would like really get fired based on that stuff because they could foment the masses. It's a lot harder to foment the masses consistently anymore without people starting to feel like you're kind of a phony, because they can fact check you. And like every time I mess up on air, there's no part of me that thinks like nobody noticed it, because they totally noticed it. So you got to if you don't have a certain level of humility about it, which I don't think I didn't. I've learned, I've had it beaten into me. Because I grew up listening to the blowhards, and I thought that's how you're supposed to be. And then over time you realize like, oh, okay. Well, some people are definitely totally wrong and stupid, but a lot of the people that are disagreeing with me are making good points. And if I don't acknowledge that, then I'm like obviously a D-bag. So that is my advertisement for going into sports radio. There's a good buffer now. Are you talking about the buffer on my internet stream or on the like the buffer between sports media people and the audience? I think there's definitely a more closer connection between the audience. You can't control the narrative. Yeah, it's way harder to control the narrative, which is good. That's a good thing. So anyway, long story short, the cool thing about YouTube and like live streaming or just sports radio or anything where it's long form is that I do think you've got a lot more people that are willing to just sit and listen and maybe consider something they hadn't thought about, or in like likewise with the hosts. So I enjoy it. And also like I'm lucky because with Sean and I on the radio side of things. Like, this is a subjective thing, but there are a lot of people that find us pretty funny and entertaining. And when you have humor, you don't have to lean into the negativity as much, because you can't be boring. That'll be death. That's the number one. So for any of you youth out there that want to get into like maybe live streaming or sports radio or sports media, but especially like, because ESPN's a whole different deal. Like if you're talking, my job is not to talk about sports. My job is to be interesting. And that's the sum total of it. Now, it usually works out if you're on sports radio that, yeah, you should be talking about sports a bunch of time. But anybody can get on and talk about sports and read box scores and everything. So first and foremost, the job title is be interesting enough that people want to listen to you. So, and that's fun. So as long as you don't have to go on rants all the time or be negative all the time, as long as you can find other ways to be interesting. And I'm lucky enough to have Sean Pendergast, who makes it super easy to be interesting. Chip is the obvious answer. No one checks the boxes like he does. And I'll do the like a more expansive list of the offensive coordinators in a bit. I'm having a hard time finding arguments against Chip Kelly. I think the biggest one, and this would be on the speculative side of things, is okay, you got to be mindful of the dynamic that Chip Kelly, even though he's changed, I don't believe he's nearly as up-tempo as he used to be. Like when he was an NFL head coach, every year his defenses would be in the top 3 or 5 of total snaps taken. And you could see the wear and tear accumulate on the defense by the end of the year. So with DeMeco as the head coach especially, I think DeMeco's going to want more balance. He's going to want to be able to give his defense a break at times, and I think Chip Kelly understands that if he takes the job, or if he took, I don't know if they're even talking, but if he took the job. So I guess that would be my only concern would be if there were philosophical differences with how DeMeco and Chip wanted to operate the offense. But man, like you can say all you want about how talented Ohio State is and there's more of the talent than Chip Kelly, whatever. It's freaking hard to win. It's freaking hard to win a national championship, and it's really hard to start off a game with 4 straight 70-plus yard drives. Like that's a hell of a recent resume. Hey, he couldn't turn Cal into a contender the way Jim Harbaugh turned Stanford into a contender. Fine, I'm not going to use that as a check against him. Yeah, the assistant O-line coach was fired too. I don't think I mentioned that. I apologize. I don't know, fam. I was saying on one Landry's lives, it would be epic if you got on with him and Stutz. I would totally go on with those guys. He hasn't asked me to come on one of his live streams in a long time, but I don't think, he might think, I might have to tell him that I'm open to it. I think Landry tries to be respectful of my time, so, I would totally do that. I always want to do more like guests and everything, but then I don't know. I know there's a part of me that just I like getting these reps in case I ever have to be like a solo radio host. I feel like if I can do 2 hours and 16 minutes with no commercials, that doing an entire show with commercial breaks, I'd feel pretty good about it. Yeah. As far as Chip and DeMeco having a good relationship in Philly, DeMeco has talked about Chip Kelly before, and he's kind of brought him up unprompted because people ask so much about Kyle Shanahan being an influence on him, Gary Kubiak being an influence on him, that he has to remind people that, hey, I did play for Chip Kelly for 3 years too. And a lot of what DeMeco, I think, likes and uses with sports science started with Chip Kelly and the way he ran things. So I think that's very much possibly. Was there word on what exactly drove the Texans to fire Slowik? I would think they are certain they can find an upgrade. I'm not trying to be like snarky with this response at all. Like I genuinely mean that. I want to phrase it in a way that doesn't sound like well, duh. I think honestly, basically the same complaints that a lot of the fans have had about this offense this year. I think that looking at it objectively, Nick Caserio and DeMeco Ryans would feel the same way. The lack of execution, some of the process issues of even operating, just getting in and out of the huddle, the regression in pass protection, the regression of CJ's game in some ways because of the poor pass protection. I think when you watch, I am curious, and I wonder if watching those games last week, if DeMeco had time to watch Jaden Daniels and the options Jaden Daniels had when he got blitzed, like how, and credit to Cliff Kingsbury, who D'Amico could have fired. Blitz comes, ball comes out, there's a hot, there's an open, we've got options. We've got different ways to attack. In the Texans, it felt like they spent the first half of the season almost stubbornly banging their head against the wall, waiting for it to click and asking guys to do things that they either didn't understand or were incapable of doing. And it's hard to look at that and not think, man, I mean, Bobby Slowik himself, as I credit Bobby for I think Bobby was pretty open about admitting when he could have made calls better or what have you. But he's even admitted that they didn't adjust quickly enough to seeing all that cover two stuff, the cover two as frequently as they did. And it's kind of alarming, really, because that's something you should have anticipated. You've got 3 guys in your wide receiving core that are scary as hell. Yeah, you're going to see a lot of cover two. That's just, you are. Have a plan for it and be good at it. So when teams show you cover two, hey, run the ball at will. Team wants to play cover two all the time. Run the ball at will. But Bobby and we knew this all offseason, Bobby last year hadn't demonstrated an ability to run the football. And that was one of the big question marks. He was a passing game coordinator in San Francisco, and he, and they didn't run the ball well or consistently last year. And then I always get nervous when it's a little too easy to think that Joe Mixon alone was going to be the solution. Because, excuse me, I should be doing live reads for Zinn, but I'm not because I don't trust it. It's Vice. I know I'm doing gambling this year. I'm probably not going to do it next year, okay? But as I cover up the Bet US thing. I wanted to get some experience just kind of getting established as somebody who had sponsors. And I think I will probably move beyond anything Vice related next year in situations where I can control it. On the radio, it's like I do what I'm told. So, but yeah, so Bobby never really showed or demonstrated an ability to engineer a run game, and it didn't really get any better. I mean, we all know if you watch the Texans game this year, there were games where Joe Mixon had 140 yards rushing, but they didn't run the ball well. It was kind of fascinating, actually. I'm sure there's already articles out there, but I'd love to see how many teams had a 1,000-yard rusher, but with a success rate as bad as the Texans were. So a success rate is on any given down, did you get a certain percentage of distance to the first down marker or the goal line? And the Texans were really, really bad at it. Joe Mixon got hit in the backfield more than anybody else in the league for guys that got heavy usage. And yet he had over 1,000 yards rushing. So I'm guessing that it had to be close to a record of some sort. And it's good for Bobby as well. It's good for Bobby as well. That stuff is good. I know. It's a problem. Okay, real quick. So nicotine pouches. Theoretically, it's better for you than dip or smoking, obviously, but dip as well because you don't have as many of the carcinogens that tend to be in tobacco products. But it is something that's still very addictive. And I don't like being addicted to things, and I kind of took it as just kind of a way to, use it for improved focus and clarity, which is a lot of studies. The old saying about nicotine used to be great drug, horrible delivery system. Nicotine has benefits, but it's also, when you're sucking in smoke and however many other chemicals to get it into your system, the sum total of it's not that great. So the theory would be with nicotine pouches that much gentler, not the known carcinogens and everything in it. And yet I still find myself using way more Zyn packets in a day than I had anticipated. And I don't want to get people hooked on any kind of vice. I've learned that in life that for the most part, I've got somewhat of an addictive personality and I do not need to tempt it with things. If only for the money, my God. Does it cause angiogenesis? I'm going to pretend I know what angiogenesis is and say that the studies are inconclusive. I have no idea. All right, how much truth is there to the Tunsil talk? If it's as bad as reported, I think paying him like a leader puts D'Amico in a terrible situation. Your leader needs to be at practice leading. All right, Mike, please, can you flesh that out a little bit? Because, like, do you mean what's been genuinely reported, or like, so I don't know what the scuttlebutt is on, in the message on the message boards or what have you, or is it more just kind of our speculation about it and everything else? So I don't know. Like, I'll tell you. So as far as what's reported, if there's something out there that I don't know about, then I don't know. This has always been my hang up with Tunsil, is that, for one, right, we'll get to the practice part of things. So my hang up has been that he's an awesome pass protector. He's really, really, like, I enjoy watching him in pass protection. There's times where he's kind of undersized, so his bad plays tend to be really bad in terms of embarrassing because he'll get bull rushed, but it's few and far between. By and large, I mean, he's like a martial artist with his hands. And I just look at it as a defensive lineman thinking about going against somebody like him. It's like, man, he's got an answer for every move you want to hit. I wasn't an edge rusher, but, like, I know enough about it. He's got a move. He's got something to counter everything you do, and he's really good with it. He's got really good feet. I would always be really frustrated because he was not nearly as good as a run blocker, despite, I think, having the athletic ability to be a better run blocker. And the size isn't an excuse for some of the run blocking I'm talking about. Midway through the season, I think he committed to being a different type of football player. He cleaned up the false starts. He started being way more engaged in the run game more consistently. He had some examples of some really good run blocks. He still had some really bad moments in the run game too, but that's not something that you can all of a sudden flip the switch and become an incredible run blocker when you've spent years not doing it. So I'm way open to seeing if Laramie is he's a different version of himself. And I've always felt like, man, he has the potential to be all pro, but he's just not nearly the complete player that a guy like Penei Sewell is, or Trent Williams, or some of those other guys. But I felt like I saw a difference and a change in him at the second half of the season. And I slowly and grudgingly started to change my mind on it. So I'm open to it right now. As far as, okay, let's see, where we go. That was my next question. He doesn't seem to like to be physical. Might be related to Schultz. This is when it comes to the composition of the offensive line. It's okay to have a couple finesse guys on your offensive line. Ideally, only one, as long as the other four are headbangers. And right now, I think they've got some young guys who have it in them to try to be headbangers. But I don't think in their hearts, I don't think Titus Howard, Kenyon Green, I don't think those guys are necessarily headbangers in their hearts. But Titus is also really, really big and pretty athletic, like really athletic by guard standards. If he embraces playing guard and he has a good offensive line coach, I think he could be a really good guard. And he's showing signs that he embraced it this time and that he's kind of eased off a little bit on insisting that he's an offensive tackle. So I'm still like, I'm open to seeing some change there. If you look at the run game that worked well against the Chiefs, a lot of it was inside zone and duo type stuff where you're double teaming a defensive lineman up to the backer. And Titus had some really good examples in that game of doing that, of just being a large human, pushing other large humans. So I think there's potential there. I think they might have something in that. So I'm totally open to that. I feel like Shaq Mason in his younger days, yeah, he was a headbanger. I mean, he's a guy 6'1" who became a really good guard in the NFL. But this last year, man, I think through a combination of age and injury, and I don't know, maybe conditioning. I thought like both he and Titus look damn well fed to start off training camp. I just think it's time to move on from him. And Smith, the right guard from Kansas City, is a free agent, for instance. He's one of the best free agents out there this year. The Chiefs just paid Chris Jones last year, and it was hard to pay him. I don't know if they've got it in him to retain another guy on a franchise tag this year. So there's a chance. There's a chance. Is this a reference to the Zin, the length of the podcast, or just your general distaste for me and my sports media career? I have no way of knowing. I'm assuming positive intent here, so I'm going to think that it's a long live stream, and that's what you're talking about. Do I think Juice? Oh, you know what? Okay, wait. Where's the other one? Oh, Mason spinning Lupe Tortilla. That's another big benefit to playing guard. I would tell Titus. I was like, man, you're gonna get pretty damn big playing guard, and if your technique is dialed in, it's not a bad life. That's what I learned when they moved me to nose tackle in a 3-4. I'm like, oh. I got here. They made this change just in time for me to be living in a city with Tex-Mex because I took full advantage of it. I used the avocado for all of its strength and power in becoming a 3-4 nose tackle. I weighed like 295 as a 4-3 defensive tackle in Jacksonville. And by the time I was done here, I was like 320, 325. Let's see. Oh, wait. Somebody made a good point about Titus. Yeah, but when you pay him that much, he becomes a standard. Be like him, and we will pay you. Right. And that's where, again, I'll go back to, I think Laramie, I guess I should have followed up on it by this. Yes, Laramie is more of a finesse player, but he showed a willingness to be more than that in the second half of the season. I got to really kind of reset my presumptions about him and really go back and watch. And I kept noticing more and more in the second half of the season, and it coincided with when he stopped having the false starts, that he was plugged in and engaged in the run game. The one game, the negative that I actually took as a big positive, we talked about this 2.5 hours ago, was when Laramie, on that screenplay that Nico Collins got a touchdown, and I can't remember which game that was, but Nico had that long touchdown called back because of the illegal man downfield. That was Laramie's penalty. But the reason it was a penalty was because, A, he sold the run really hard, like too aggressively, but he fired off the line. He made it look like this is a run play. And then he got to his spot, hustled his ass off to get to his proper position on a screen, which he doesn't always do. And yet he was illegally downfield. So that's where he screwed up on that side of the detail. But the big one was when they announced it was him that had committed the penalty, he didn't try to shirk the responsibility at all. He kind of he looked disappointed in himself. And I thought at that moment, like, okay, all right, this is a different version of Laramie. Let's see if it sticks. I think Laramie at the end of the year when they were asking the guys to practice in pads and with some physicality, I think he accepted that. As far as I understand it, maybe there's reports otherwise. And that's a hard thing. At the end of a year, whether you're the best team in the league or not, it's like guys are banged the hell up. And it's really hard to get guys gung-ho about practicing in pads in the playoffs, especially like in having 9-on-7 drills and everything. I grew up in a different era. I grew up playing for Tom Coughlin where you didn't bother complaining about stuff like that. So I don't know. I'm just all that to say that I'm open to Laramie Tunsil being a different version of himself so far. Let's see. Brandon, and I think Mike, you were the one that asked the original question, right? So that's why I listen. I don't have enough time to follow these rabbit holes anymore. I know. A woman in my family the other day asked my wife about, is it true that they fired the three of the officials from the Texans game because they were helping the Chiefs cheat? And I'm I'm almost positive no. Let me check. And it was it. This is at 5:30 in the morning. And I didn't want to let her down. So I don't want to say who it was in my family. So I checked all the main outlets and I'm like, all right, I guess I got to check Twitter. And I probably spent 15 minutes chasing down what was just a fake report on Facebook. So this is the same relative that once every 3 weeks I have to explain to her that no, you don't have to call that number that claims they're the IRS. If the IRS really needs to talk to you, they will send a letter. It will not be from a Gmail address. So yeah, it's hard, man. It's hard. A lot of rabbit holes out there. She knows who she is. Yeah, but she's not watching this live stream. She is falling for a meme on Facebook as we speak. It's very much fun in this political environment, by the way. I swear, that's why I refuse to even, I try not to even make casual political jokes because nobody will ever take, try to do it in the old school way, like the way Johnny Carson might have done it. Where like, yeah, you're going to make fun of all politicians. You can't do it. Can't do it anymore. But God, yeah, just trying to, I'm basically like a fact-checking website for some of my older relatives and youngers. I'm like, man, listen, it's not that I hate your candidate at all. And I might be voting for your candidate, but just don't be buying into the false information so quickly and easily. Yeah, it's just a home warranty. My hope with Tunsil is that he's one of those guys who plays harder when the people above him are competent. If you knew Slowik, okay, this is a good point. And this is one of those things that from the outside looking in, you just never know. If you knew Slowik was doing dumb crap, maybe that was affecting his effort. Yeah, when you go back to the Jack Easterby days, I mean, I always looked at the blow-up that Justin Reed had reportedly with David Culley, and had we ever had a report that Justin Reed was a malcontent or a problem in the locker room? Has there ever been a problem coming out of Kansas City that Justin Reed isn't a good dude or anything? When good people act out, when good people are put into dysfunctional situations and they act out, you can't blame the good person for acting out. Now, I think that with Laramie, there is more. Like Laramie's got a suave side to him, Like there's like Laramie's all about like a lot of things that I guess rub people the wrong way or whatever. And he is more of a finesse player, and he does. I mean, like the thing that made me the most nervous was when on the Pivot podcast, CJ described him as a vet who's not doing anything more than what he needs to do. And I was kind of like, like, yeah, there are really good players who kind of are vets that way. But the good teams tend to have a whole bunch of veterans who are guys like Daniil Hunter and like Jerry Hughes. Like those guys are really good influences. Now, you can have a few of the guys who are kind of the stereotypical, like, hey, like I'm really good at what I do and whatever. You can have a few of those guys. There's a tipping point, like you got to have the main culture of the team be what it is. And then in pro sports, there's always a little bit of wiggle room for the guys that don't quite fit the mold, but you know what? They're really good at what they do. And as long as the sum total is that you got a bunch of guys who are doing things the right way, I don't worry about it as much. The problem is, and I think to follow up on, it was either Mike or somebody else, that made the point. It's that the offensive side of the ball is not nearly as swarmy as the defensive side of the ball. So but now two of your best players, I feel like Joe Mixon and Nico Collins are super swarmy. I think CJ Stroud is obsessive in the good way. Like in a way where CJ's always going to have to manage, where one of you guys once set me straight because I had said, like, it's good to be obsessed to be obsessed. He said, well, it's good to have passion. Obsession is like by definition, when you're obsessed with it, it ventures into like an unhealthy and unproductive side of things. So yeah, it's managing your obsessive tendencies enough to keep it into a healthy passion, like a driven passion. And I think I think CJ's wired that way. I think he's always going to have to be like reminding himself, like, all right, take it easy. All right, we can't have everything perfect all at once. So I don't worry about him at all. But the sum total of things on the offensive side of the ball is that, yeah, you need more guys who come in like swinging a baseball bat at people's heads and then ask questions later. Yeah, you want a little bit of that. You can demand effort, but the player also has to execute. Yeah, in Texans Spur, this is one thing that maybe I didn't do a good enough job of explaining the way I feel about it during the season. For me, it rubbed me the wrong way when week after week we would hear about how, well, the players have to execute. Because when the offensive coordinator is saying that, and I don't think Bobby was doing it in a way to displace blame. I think he was saying that was part of the situation. The job of the coach is to get guys to execute properly. And the challenges are myriad. Sometimes it's that, okay, this guy has a hard time with this technique. Sometimes it's that I'm not coaching him properly, or I'm not teaching the technique properly, or I'm not communicating the scheme properly. Sometimes it's that the guy is just a bum, and that's the ones you really got to worry about. I don't think they had a bunch of bums per se on offense. So the execution issues, and especially when it's execution issues from guys who have previously executed well, I tend to think of like, yeah, that's a leadership issue. That's your job as the offensive coordinator, is not to just draw up plays on a whiteboard and then say, get her done. Like, your job is to coach them and get the execution out of them. The old Bum Phillips quote, which I think is perfect, is it's not about how much you know, it's about what you can get your guys to do. And that is it. There's so many whiteboard warriors out there that scheme up a perfect game plan, but it's the other old saying, like a good plan well executed always beats a brilliant plan poorly executed. Yeah, if you're that's where it's fun. Sometimes you use the military as an analogy. I'm not trying to make a direct comparison, obviously. But like, the nice thing about the military is that you can kind of mix and match, and like, okay, you can take a commander, put him in this unit, and lo and behold, wow, performance improved. But pretty easy to, it's easy to do that in the military because you can do it. You've got unlimited resources in terms of numbers of officers that you can throw at a problem, especially in peacetime. In football, it's not the same. In football, it's like, well, we've got this guy on a 4-year contract. Let's see what he can do. And you can't just roll in a new offensive coordinator 2 months into it. I mean, you can try, but it's like, it's a lot dicier. And then also, it's just, you don't have the same numbers advantage that the military does. You don't have millions of different options to do to plug people in there. So it becomes a big guessing game of like, okay, is the execution a problem because the players just are incapable of executing it? Or is the execution a problem because the offensive coordinator does not coach it, teach it, motivate it properly? And that's what we'll find out. I think by and large, the offense, they'll make some improvements, and probably, I think they're going to focus heavily on the offense. I would expect them to focus heavily on the offense in both free agency and the draft. I mean, because the defense is chock full of young players already. You've almost got, like, adding more young players to the mix, so you almost got way too many young, awesome, like, yeah, ideally they'd be young, awesome players, but they've already got young, awesome players on the defense. So focus on the offense in the draft, and we'll see. All right, are the guys who are underperforming this year looking different next year with a different offensive coordinator? And I think your best chance for that is to get a veteran offensive coordinator. This is an interesting one. Lane Kiffin. I think Lane Kiffin is loving what he does, and I think Lane Kiffin's. I think Lane Kiffin likes. Lane Kiffin has the ultimate freedom to be Lane Kiffin, and there's only one Lane Kiffin in the world, and I think when he's a head coach, he gets to do that. Now, I mean, I know. Well, all right, he did the old car wash at Alabama. Got fired before the bowl game. Because, was that the last time he was a coordinator? Let's bring this up. Let's look at Lane Kiffin. I believe that was the last time he was a coordinator, was it not? I mean, and he even after doing a good job with Alabama, I think he kind of chafed at being an offensive coordinator and not the main guy. $12 million in dead money to cut Mason. What's the sum total of the? There's a net on that though too. Whatever the cap savings are. If you could look that up, that would be awesome. So, old Lane was, let's see, the OC at Alabama, then at Florida Atlantic, and then Ole Miss. Yeah. So, I think the last time he was an offensive coordinator was at USC. And I think he's a head coach until he dies at this point, because everybody else is going to try to put a lid on Lane Kiffin, and you can't. He needs to fly. He's a peacock. He needs to fly. Whatever that quote was. Maybe Lane doesn't want to deal with NIL. Yeah, that's the other dynamic. You know what? And I wonder too with like Chip Kelly. I wonder if Chip Kelly, and this is like the real football guys, the guys that really love the X's and O's, They tend to prefer the NFL because it's about so much less BS. And I used to say that all the time. I mean, the NFL, in a lot of ways, from a coaching standpoint, it's more pure. You don't have to spend out time kowtowing to 17-year-olds to try to get them to come to your program. You don't have to. There isn't as much incentive to lie to your players as there is in college. Like all those things. Now, things are a bit more transparent now because of the transfer portal. It's a lot more like the NFL. But now you're dealing with some of those same issues that you're still going to have in the NFL, but you're dealing with 19-year-olds who are also millionaires. And man, that part of it, I remember talking to Dom Capers about this when it was in 2006. The writing was on the wall. Dom was probably going to get fired. I think he was starting to feel it. And I had I was talking to him about something else. I was just having a nice long talk with him in his office. And Dom said, whatever happens, I know I'm going to be fine. And there's a part of me that really enjoys being a coordinator because it's all football. It's all X's and O's. I remember talking to him about it when he was up in Green Bay. He said the really nice thing about Green Bay is that they don't have an owner. They've got their management because it's a publicly held company. Or because they have shareholders, not one owner, that it's all about football up in Green Bay. They pretty much the football people do the football things. At the time, I think he was with Ted Thompson. Ted Thompson runs the show, and you don't have to worry about any of the other stuff. And there's value in that. And I could see Chip Kelly kind of being that guy, like, yeah, man, all right, I want another crack at the NFL, and I want to go up and be an offensive coordinator where I don't have to worry about all the extraneous stuff. I don't have to take the calls at 2 a.m. when one of my players got arrested or anything like that. I can just be an offensive coordinator in the NFL where there's another thing. This is something Tom Coughlin told me once, was that like when it comes to just coaching the X's and O's, there's no better place than the NFL because the playing field is as level as it gets. Like, the worst team in the NFL is way closer to the best team in the NFL than in any other level of football. The worst team in your high school division or region is nowhere near as good as the best team a lot of times. Like not even close, 72-0 we're talking. College football, likewise, there's just a talent disparity. You get into the NFL and it's, man, every single week, no matter how good you are, you could get beat by the worst team in the league. And there's a purity to that I think hardcore football coaches really, really like. There's a lot of college coaches. Now, there's a lot of college coaches that love college football that also love the X's and O's, but they like working with kids. They like being on the developmental side of things. And then, frankly, there's some very successful college coaches who are just simply good recruiters and not much into the X's and O's. Some of the guys who get a lot of credit for being really good with the X's and O's are actually just really, really, really good recruiters. Because like when you've got like the 5 best wide receivers in the country, it's really easy to scheme up some sweet offenses and have Danny Werfel throw the ball. So offense similar to Kingsbury. So Kingsbury is like a modified air raid type deal. That's an interesting one. Yeah, boy, if they brought in. And now with Kingsbury, the thing with me, because I was skeptical of Kingsbury, I think the big difference with Kingsbury is that I think he might be a guy who ultimately is just best suited at being an offensive coordinator. Look, he took the money to be a head coach, and he wanted to be a head coach twice in college in the NFL, but he's never really proven himself to be a really good head coach, either in college or the NFL. But man, this year as an offensive coordinator, when he could just focus on the football side of things, I think we probably saw our best version of Cliff Kingsbury since he was an offensive coordinator in college. And also especially because he has those tendencies of extreme spread offense by NFL standards, it's hard to play. You want to have restrictor plates on him. He's got a defensive-minded head coach that's going to put some restrictor plates on him and explain to him, like, listen, Cliff, well, we can't have the defense out there for 90 snaps a game. We're going to get run through. We'll get run through like a hot sword through a peasant's belly if we do that. So I like Kingsbury as a coordinator. They could have had him. I was skeptical of it. I didn't want it at the time. I was wrong on that, at least so far. And I don't worry about Kingsbury having a second year the way the way Slowik did, just because Kingsbury has been the coordinator as he was also the head coach for a long time in the NFL now. I think he's learned some good lessons. Yeah, if you could go back in time and put Cliff Kingsbury in, I think it might have worked out pretty damn well. Let's see. Brady and Jameis still a proven OC. His offense has scored about 30 points a game, tops in passing most years. Where is, let me look up one thing real quick. I wonder if, yeah, no, can't do him. I was trying to think of what, like, I want to look at Joe Brady's career and kind of try to think of the way his career arc went. Sorry for the dead air, everybody, but my pipes are starting to scream too. This has been a much longer live stream than I anticipated, but we've got 6,100 people on the stream, which I think is a record of some sort, and it keeps getting higher, which is surprising me to no end. So I'm going to keep talking as long as my voice holds up, and just bear with me for a moment as my administrative skills fail me because I haven't eaten since 6 a.m. But I want to add this. There we go. Joe Brady to the mix. And I know we got some LSU Tigers on here who could fill me in way better on Joe Brady. Come on, son of a bitch. Get me. Here we go. Share screen. Joe Brady. So, and Joe Brady was a guy we brought up a lot this year just because he was an example of when they fired an offensive coordinator in Buffalo, and lo and behold, the offense improved in a lot of respects. So his career arc from 2019 got a lot of really, really, really good buzz from LSU, obviously, and what they did that year. Passing game coordinator, goes to the Carolina Panthers. He's an offensive coordinator, gets caught up in the Dave Tepper wash, ends up as the Bills' quarterback's coach for 2 years, and gets promoted in the middle of last 2 seasons ago to offensive coordinator, and now they were very, very good this year. And so that's a guy, like when the Panthers hired him as an offensive coordinator with very limited NFL experience, but a really good year with LSU and all the work he did there, goes to Carolina, where I don't know if anybody was in a position to succeed at that point, and like they find a scapegoat every 3 months there, but then goes to the Bills and works for, all right, this might be the argument. Joe Brady might be the argument against what I've been saying about not wanting to hire a first-time offensive coordinator. He does have those 2 years of experience in Carolina, so he would have learned some lessons as a first-time NFL offensive coordinator, and what the challenges are. But that's probably the best. That's one of the best counter arguments against my theory of not wanting a first-time offensive coordinator. And he's on a team where they have a defensive-minded head coach in Sean McDermott, but it worked out. And you remember, you go back to Brian Daboll. Brian Daboll was on my list of guys to consider before they pulled a surprise retention up there in New York. That's the one. Yeah, that's the one. There's a lot of similarities there. So a Joe Brady type candidate with minimal experience and not necessarily a great track record. I still want a guy who's got experience as an offensive coordinator. It's going to be, I guess the big question will be, and somebody says, what happens to Gerard? Gerard's has interviewed or is interviewing somewhere for an offensive coordinator job. I personally like Gerard Johnson a lot, and I think he's got a big future. I think he's going to be great. Like, the way I've seen him work with high school kids, I've seen him work with guys in the NFL. I think he'll do well. For right now, what I most want is, okay, this would be my counter argument to my counter argument with Joe Brady. Joe Brady is on a team with a defensive-minded head coach, but a coach who's been a head coach now in the NFL for a long, long time. We've still got D'Amico in the early stages of him being an NFL coach, and I think it's really hard to. I think it's really, really hard to say that D'Amico has the same ability that Sean McDermott has to maybe manage a younger offensive coordinator. So that's where I'm still leaning towards a Chip Kelly type, an equivalent of the Wade Phillips hire back in 2011. I heard my wife get home, and she's going to want to eat soon. And I can tell that my IQ has just dropped by about 40 points here in the last 20 minutes. So thanks, everybody, for joining. Please, if you don't know me, I'm Seth Payne. I played for the Texans the first 5 years of the franchise's existence. I'm on Sports Radio 610, the morning show these days, and I have this YouTube stream where we talk a whole lot of Texans. So please like and subscribe and do all of that stuff. And look forward to entering this new era, this new era of a new offensive coordinator to be determined later for the Houston Texans.